The Cycle of Hatred. A Naruto insert. Chapter 2.9, 19. Published by Scribble Hub. Chapter 2.9, 19. Deep orange light beamed through the classroom's tall windows, bathing the room in the setting sun's brilliance as it dipped below the horizon. I carried a water-filled bucket with me up each row, silently dragging the mop across the classroom's hardwood floors, and used a blade scraper to dislodge hardened pieces of gum from under the long tables. I had no doubt my classmates would stick more gum underneath the table by next week, but I did it anyway. Solitude at school wasn't something I expected to experience again. I took my lunches on the school roof and only appeared when I had to. However, the solitude gave me time to think past the guilt and disgust at myself and reflect on why I felt the way I did. Most likely, it was because I was a child, one with the experience of an adult, and from a child's perspective, my response to Shikamaru was fair. He went for the jugular first because he couldn't stomach criticism, and I responded in kind. Shikamaru hadn't spoken to me at all since then. Rather, I avoided speaking to him, or anyone for that matter. We'd argued about our differences in worldview before, but I always pulled away before things could really get ugly. I wasn't a child. I should have been above targeting his insecurities, even if he was a little shit and wasn't above targeting mine. At the end of the day, he would grow and learn that it wasn't okay to do so. As for me, that was a lesson I'd known long before this life. There was no excuse for how I acted, so if it took me being alone to stop being a child, then so be it, because the one time that I didn't, our entire friend group fractured. You're still here? I looked down from the top of the tiered classroom. Baruka-sensei, leaning the mop in the bucket against the back wall, I jumped from table to table and landed at the front of the class. You could have taken the stairs, you know? I nodded. You're right. Where's Ren? Isn't she meant to be on cleaning duty with you? He looked around the classroom. Don't tell me she's ditched it? Dunno, I shrugged, but I'm kind of glad she isn't here. Doing this alone was pretty calming. Baruka gave me an odd look and walked over to his desk, putting on his Chunin vest and grabbing his backpack from under the table. Even if that's true, you should probably head on home now. All the after-school clubs are done and they'll be locking the front gate soon. I was already finished anyway, I replied. I'll see you next week, sensei. Have a nice weekend. I forced a smile on my face and nodded. The best way to get back on track was to stick to a schedule, so the first thing I'd do after dropping my things home would be to go and train. Looking out at the fields behind the school, I saw the last football games wrapping up and a few of the other club members were trudging towards the gate. I joined them at one of the ground floor's exits. Wait for us, Naruto. Haruto tore around the corner first, followed first by Nori and then Ko. They wore plain shirts and shorts, with socks hiked up just under their knees. Against my initial thought to leave, I stayed still and waited for them to reach me. Maybe it was how elated they looked as they ran up to me, but against my initial reaction to ignore them, I stood still. They gathered in front of me, and I noticed that, despite how much they'd grown, I still stood taller than them. Why are you still here? Asked Haruto. I had to clean my homeroom, I replied. Ko winced in sympathy after tying her hair back to keep it out of her sweaty face. We had to clean our homeroom yesterday. You managed to get out so early. Me and her were stuck in there until 6, said Nori. I bet you guys were chatting the entire time, I replied, snorting softly when they couldn't form a reply. If that's all, I'll be off. I need to go train for the exams. They're only a few months away. See you guys around. Wait, Haruto grabbed my shoulder and then let go immediately when I looked at him, flushing slightly. Sorry, I just meant, he looked at Ko and Nori, who nodded in support. Spar with us, please. I blinked. What? We want you to spar with us, repeated Nori. We know you're the best at taijutsu in the entire school, except for Neji Hyuga in the year above yours. Please, it'll help us improve. Exactly, said Ko. Haruto smirked and clenched his fist. Besides, we'll get to show you how much we've learned. Between the three of them, any resistance I had crumbled. I reached over to ruffle their hair and walked away to a series of surprised yelps and cries. I continued walking without looking back until I reached the school gates. What are you guys waiting for? I asked. You scared or something? Haruto was the first to look up, his gray eyes clearing up instantly. You wish. Ko and Nori beamed and sprinted after him, and I let their animated conversation wash over me. Instead of taking to the roofs as I usually did, I walked through the village, obviously avoiding the more populated bits, and absorbed the sights. The people aside, the Hidden Leaf Village was a beautiful place, with a nice forest aesthetic that blended with the sprawling buildings. None were ever taller than 4 stories, with the Hokage's red house being the only exception. 20 minutes later, we gathered in a field under the shadow of a great tree. Haruto, Ko, and Nori stood ahead of me with determined grins and I relaxed, shooting them an easygoing smile. This'll be strictly taijutsu, alright? You guys haven't got to use actual weapons in taijutsu yet, so it's only fair. Ready? They nodded and I shifted my weight. Alright, come at me. Since it was 3 against 1, I sought to break their advantage by running straight at them. Not having expected the move, all 3 hopped back. I suppressed the instinct to mold my chakra and threw myself into the thick of it. Nori looked the most hesitant, so I went for him first. Using the momentum from my run, I slammed a front kick into his hastily prepared guard, sending him sprawling. Seeing him roll across the grass got Haruto and Ko to spark to life. The redhead engaged with a determined yell. I blocked her first punch and dodged the next. She pressed her advantage and pushed me back, giving Nori time to recover and Haruto an opening to exploit. He came around me and tried to snake his hands around my neck, so I dropped low, flooring the surprised Ko and using the momentum to do the same to him. I rose just as Nori barreled into me. We slammed into the tree and I leaned forward, slowly pushing him back. I didn't know you were this strong, I chuckled. He bared his teeth in a grin that looked more like a grimace as he struggled to stop me from overpowering him. I've been helping my pa around the smithy. The academy has a free gym on the ground floor, you know. It might help you get stronger in a more focused way. I might have to start doing that with how this is going. I nodded in acceptance and pushed Nori far enough to give me some space to maneuver before suddenly letting him go. I pivoted and he went flying, arms outstretched to cling onto me, and collided headfirst against the tree. And my nose, he yelled. Haruto and Ko stood on either side of me, and based on the gradual lack of cursing from behind me, it was safe to assume Nori was ready to pull something too. I smiled when they started to circle me. These 3 had a bad habit of assuming I'd wait for them to set up whatever it was they wanted to try. Smirking, I feinted a kick in Nori's direction, causing the black-haired boy to flinch sharply. Ko and Haruto, assuming I was about to go for him, broke the circle. The redhead went high, while Haruto went low, swinging his heel around the back of my foot. I braced down, negating his sweep. Damn, he cursed and rolled out of the way of my stomp. Ko stepped in, eyes on me, twinkle toes. Grinning at the nickname, I countered her incoming right hand with a sharp left hook, knocking her off balance. She hissed and shook it off, engaging with a fast 1-2 combination. I blocked her lead hand and caught her other arm, swinging around to face Nori. He was too committed to a sidekick to stop and sunk his heel into her gut, pressing all the air out of her, and effectively knocking her out of the fight. He was perfectly off balance from his kick, so all it took was a jab to send him on his behind for the second time this fight. I rushed after him and slammed my fist down just next to his head, also knocking him out of the fight. I stood up and put my hands on my hips. Well, that's it for you guys. Something collided against me, and I tripped forward, bracing myself against the tree trunk in front of me. I'm not done yet, said Haruto, taking up a basic ready stance. It's you and me now, don't hold back. Fixing my shirt, I looked at him appraising LY. If you're so sure. For the first time in our free-for-all match, I molded my chakra. The gap between us closed in less than a second and I grabbed hold of his lead hand, solidifying our connection with chakra. Yanking him in, I pulled on his neck and slammed a knee into his face. He reeled back, dazed, and I shoved him forwards. Haruto regained his balance and stepped forward to meet me, throwing a combination of blows. Surprised by how fast they'd come, I stopped advancing and blocked them, letting him set the pace. He fell into a familiar combination of palm strikes and slapped my hits aside. After the 4th exchange, I signaled a timeout and stared at him inquisitively. Haruto, when did you learn the gentle fist? The gentle fist? He frowned. I've just been studying Asami's fighting style since her taijutsu's better than mine. She's a Hyuga, I replied. So she uses the gentle fist. Perhaps the second most important thing to their clan after the Byakugan. All the blood drained from his face. Nori laughed nervously. You've done it now, man. I am not going to go to prison, am I? Asked Haruto. I've only been working on it for a few weeks. I was going to use it in my next spar against her, but now I'm not sure. Wait, Ko spoke up. If that's the case, Naruto's using the gentle fist too. He does a lot of palm strikes and his stance is similar to Haruto's. He doesn't slap hits away, though. Haruto blinked. Really? I nodded. Yeah, I tend to deflect them with my forearms or trap them instead. Can you teach me? He asked, looking at me like a man on death row. I don't want to go to prison, Naruto. I'm an only child. First, slow down. I held back my laugh. You're not stealing secret jutsu and don't have the Byakugan, so you can't even use it in the first place. The gentle fist is more than just palm strikes. Anyone could do what you've just done. Secondly, sure, I'll teach you. Not now, though. I wiped the sweat off my forehead. We've gone it enough. He slumped in disappointment. Damn. Chin up, dude. That wasn't a no, I laughed, looking at the other two lying in the grass. But here's a more important question. Ramen, anyone? Their answers were unanimous, so I took them to Ichiraku Ramen to refuel. Go on, I said, nudging the three children forward. It's on me today. Eat till you burst. I'll only charge you if you throw it up. They shuffled nervously in front of the restaurant, peeping through the blinds at the three customers occupying the seats on the right side of the shop. Luckily for them, the left three seats were completely free, and I heard them whisper fiercely about who should sit next to the scary tattooed man. I formed 3 hand seals and focused on getting rid of my whiskers and turning my hair a dirty blonde. It was small enough of a change that Haruto and the others wouldn't think it too strange if I called it training. I pushed open the back door and locked it behind me, hanging my coat on the rack immediately to my left. I'm back, Mr. Tucci, Ayame? Kid? Tucci was the first to hear me arrive, looking up from 3 miso ramen bowls. You don't have a shift today. What do you want? I sighed. Can't I come here for the good company? These days, you only stop by for food and work, he replied with an amused glare. Out with it. What do you need? I can't believe you, but fine. I've got 3 kids, my underclassmen, who I thought I'd treat. I don't mind working extra hours to make up for the loss. Course I'll feed him. He frowned intensely at me. And work for it? You already work here, don't you? Call it an employee benefit. Now, you'd better sit your butt down on the other side of the counter. I'll get your favorite whipped in a moment. Thank you, I began, folding my arms, but no. Like I said, I brought him here. Helping out is the least I can do. Well, hold on now. Besides, I continued with a challenging glare. I'd like to feed my own customers, thank you very much. Tucci deflated at my final comment and gave me a resigned, grudging nod, popping his head through the open shutter and passing the 3 men their bowls. That was impressive. I finished typing my apron just in time to watch Ayame trail down the stairs, clad in a loose black t-shirt and baggy trousers. What? I didn't manage to get Dad to give me my own space until I was 14, she said. Look at you doing it at 10. Cut him some slack, Ayame. You're his only child. It's not like he had any previous experience to go off before you, right? She gave a half nod in agreement and raised an eyebrow. What have you done to yourself? Oh, this? Watch. I cut off the chakra flow to my face and grinned. Transformation jutsu. It lets me turn into basically anything I can imagine, sort of. Pretty neat, right? No kidding. The things I could do with that. She had a faraway look on her face for a few moments before snapping back to attention. What were you doing using it here in the first place? I shrugged noncommittally. Training. She gave me a dubious look but didn't push any further. Do you want to help out with this? I asked while forming the hand seals for the transformation jutsu. You might as well if you've got nothing to do. What, me? She scoffed. Ha, no way. It's my off day and you're asking me to do more work? Sure, not like you were going to do anything with your day besides reading Icha, right? My words had the desired effect and then some. Ayame flushed a deep scarlet, her brown eyes darting about wildly in case her father had overheard me, and then she pounced. Her hands tangled around me and squeezed tightly and her voice came out in a strangled hiss. How did you find out? Were you in my room, you little shit? She stopped and detached from me. Hold on, how do you know about Icha in the first place? I stared at her blankly. From your books, they were very informative. So you admit, she said with a deep frown. I'd punish you, but since both know Dad can't ever find out about this, how about a deal? I subdued my rising grin into a smirk. I'm listening. I need a way to buy your silence, so how about some pocket money every week? Tempting, but I'll have to pass. Mr. Tucci pays me well and I've got a lot of cash saved up. And probably some kind of inheritance from my parents. Maybe. So money's out. Damn, she chewed her lip. What can I give you that you don't already have? Easy. Just do whatever I say for the rest of the month. I chuckled a little at her horrified expression. Relax, I'm not evil. You'll probably end up being my helper during my shifts or something. Think of it this way. Mr. Tucci complains that you're lazy, right? Maybe it's because you go off to read your dirty literature, but regardless, this is a way to get him on your side. Ayame stroked her chin pensively. You might be onto something. So, do we have a deal? I smirked, offering my hand. She took it and pumped it once. We do, you little creep, cause you'd have to be one to even know what Icha is, but we have a deal indeed. She jogged up the stairs with a pep in her step, completely unaware that she'd signed away 4 weeks of her life to me. I snickered to myself at the thought of all the things I could have her do. Like my laundry, my shopping, and all the other irritating tasks I couldn't be bothered to do myself. It went beyond pettiness. Every second taken away from the regular day-to-day obligations was one I could spend on things I cared more about. Alone in the kitchen once again, I rolled up my sleeves and got to work, preparing 3 miso bowls with every topping available. I even made sure to give the kids half a hard-boiled and soft-boiled egg so they got a taste of everything. Given how active they'd been today with school, football, and their spar with me, seconds would be a certainty. After a glance at a clean ladle to make sure the transformation was still active, I walked out the back door, carefully balancing the piping hot bowls on a tray. While it wasn't something I usually do, I felt the need to go above and beyond for those three's first Ichiraku experience because it could be one of the things they remembered most fondly about their childhood. I rounded the corner and popped my head through the blinds. Yo. Nori was the closest to me, sitting at the very end, and so reacted first, yelping loudly and setting off Ko. She turned with a string of curses aimed mostly at Nori, but also at whoever had set him off, me. Haruto was wedged between her and the scary tattooed man, so he was limited in how he could react, but he twisted his neck in my direction. Watch your profanity, Ko, I said. You're in a revered establishment, after all. Maybe don't scare your customers to death and they won't curse in your revered establishment, yeah? She glared at me, an amused light in her eyes. Are you going to argue with me? Isn't the customer always right? Me? Why, I would never to prove it. Here are your meals, gentlemen. I gasped and let them grab their respective bowls, snickering at Ko's mock outrage, but I eventually gave her the final bowl. Whoa, said Nori through a mouthful of noodles. These are good, like really good. Did you make them yourself? The broth, yes. The noodles, no. Mr. Tucci made those. Ko and Haruto slurped noisily beside him, the latter conquering his fear enough to ask, is Mr. Tucci the old man with the wrinkly eyes? Don't let him hear you say that, I said. He might charge you for this meal. What? Ko frowned. Shed your hole, Haruto. I don't have any money and the ramen is too good to give up. If you say something stupid, I'll bite you. Relax, will you? The gray-eyed boy frowned back. I was just asking. Well, don't, she replied, bringing their conversation to an end. I returned to the kitchen, hearing them scarf the food down to the back entrance. Fastening my apron, I got started on the next set of orders as a new batch of customers replaced the gang of tattooed men. I could hear their animated conversation through the shutter and it was loud enough to overpower whatever my 3 underclassmen were arguing about. I swear, man, old Banri was spooked, refused to take me into the land of rice fields. I couldn't hear part of it because the men started to talk over each other, so I focused on garnishing one's order and taking the opportunity to get a closer listen. Really? Another was saying. That's not how I heard it. Apparently, the daimyo there let it happen. A pair of weathered hands plucked the bowl and, after a moment of scuffling, passed it down the long table. That's just a rumor. I've heard it all at this point. From a vicious coup, an assassination, you name it, the first man replied. Quote dot, and it's not called the land of rice fields anymore. One of my links in the place told me it's called the land of sound. Ominous, huh? I wonder what happened up there. I took a half step back from the shutter. The land of sound? Tucci's taller, broader body stopped me from retreating further. He looked down with a kind smile. It's certainly something. Countries don't change titles often unless there's been a conflict of some kind. I've heard rumors that someone supplanted the daimyo, but that's all they are, rumors. We're protected here in the land of fire. The peace will last a few years longer at the very least, so there's nothing to worry about. He patted my shoulder firmly before leaning over the counter with a booming laugh. The world beneath me lurched. I felt my heart beat violently in the back of my throat, hitching my breath with every pulse and tremor. Tucci was right on one thing. The peace would last for a few years longer, but everything would go to absolute fucking hell after that. I swallowed hard, finding my throat painfully dry. How had I missed something so important? I'd spent the last decade burning in hatred against a foe that wasn't assured, living almost carelessly with children while something far worse than Obito bided its time next door. For all the twisted things he'd done, Obito could at least be called human. I could understand his motivations, even if I hated the bastard. Orochimaru, the body-snatching, soul-plundering, abomination that he was worse. He was a much more immediate threat to my existence, one I'd practically forgotten until it was shoved right under my nose. As shameful as it was to admit it, I forgot all about Haruto, Ko, and Nori beyond the wall in front of me. I forgot about my shift at Ichiraku's. I forgot about my spat with Shikamaru and the fracture in my friend group. When my blood had stopped running cold, the first thing I did was bolt out of the back door, taking off and sprinting to the only place I could, my usual training spot. What have I been doing all this time? I hissed. No matter how many forms I went through, or how many times I slammed my bare knuckles into the tree's thick bark, no answer came to mind. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto insert, Chapter 2.10, 20. Published by Scribble Hub. Chapter 2.10, 20. Hinata stared at the building across from her, looking down at the street below every so often. The air was cold and her hoodie wasn't enough to keep her skin from prickling at the wind's touch. She was crouched before the rooftop ledge, peering over it at the apartment complex across the empty street. A slow yawn tore her mouth open and she blinked away tears to clear her vision, resuming her watch. You said he leaves his place every morning to train? Yeah, Naruto usually goes out to do his own training after breakfast. Choji sat cross-legged with his back against the ledge. I reckon he's going to come out any minute now. This was the furthest either of them had gone to find Naruto, but unless he wanted to be found, it was impossible to find him. Hinata didn't understand why he was avoiding them. With Shikamaru, he most likely felt they were avoiding him in favor of Naruto, which was why he avoided them, but Naruto didn't have any reason to be upset with them, did he? What had they done to him? Choji once wondered if he decided to stop being friends with them. At the time, Hinata didn't believe it. She was sure he was taking some time off to clear his mind, but a little over a week since and he made no effort to contact either Choji or her. She knew the two of them hadn't hung out as much as they used to, but there was a reason for that. The older Hinata became, the more the clan and her father expected of her. She'd grown more skilled over the last few years, which meant her father and the elders were beginning to spend more time preparing her for her destiny as the eventual Hyuga clan head. Her training wasn't just shinobi focused. There were so many responsibilities she had to the people of the clan that Hinata had to be aware of at all times. But she couldn't complain or express dissatisfaction, because it was unbecoming of her, both as a lady and as the clan's heir. If the choice were down to her, Hinata would spend every day with her friends, but the choice was not hers to make. The sole purpose of her existence was for the sake of the clan. As her father said, clan first, village second. To her shame, Naruto got lost somewhere within the sea of duties and lessons. There he is, said Choji. Hinata blinked and her eyes latched onto Naruto's long, blonde hair vanishing around the corner of the apartment's central staircase. Choji scrambled into a crouch, half hiding behind the ledge. They waited in nervous silence as he exited onto the street and turned into the nearest alleyway to the apartment building. Hinata. Choji reacted first, vaulting off the roof and falling onto another about a story below them. Hinata followed suit, using the ledge as leverage to jump further across the street and grabbing onto a lamppost to pull herself up. By the time they crossed the street and had taken to the rooftops, they could already see Naruto ducking under washing lines and bouncing from building to building, his hair swaying behind him. Where is he going? Choji asked, forced to raise his voice if he wanted to be heard over the wind ripping through them. Hinata sprung across a gap and continued sprinting. I don't know, but he seems excited. Despite the distance between them, Hinata could see him quite clearly. The Byakugan came with passive benefits that meant her vision was far better than normal even when she wasn't using it. Of course, anyone who learned to manipulate chakra could enhance their senses, but those with dojutsu were special in the sense that their baseline was already much higher than average. So when Hinata saw him make an abrupt drop, she immediately stopped Choji from going any further. Do you think he saw us? He asked. Hinata frowned. Unless he's got eyes in the back of his head? I don't believe so, no. Give me a moment. She took hold of her focus and her vision cleared. Nothing about his body language suggests it. I think it's just him being paranoid. Of what? Being followed? Choji took a moment to snort at the irony. No reason to try and avoid that, right? I suppose it's more than just paranoia, she acknowledged with a small smile. They gave it a moment, trailing at a slower pace than before. Naruto's sprint through the village's back alleys ended close to the busy high streets and he surged across the rooftops once more. The two of them continued to stay close and eventually touched down at a public park on the western side of the village. Since there were no buildings to hide behind, and the path Naruto was taking was wide and open, the two of them had to give him time to create enough distance between them. Once she felt he was a decent distance away, Hinata emerged from behind the cover of a tree and waited for Choji to join her. He was slightly lanky and his usually brown hair was a few shades darker. She looked him up and down before humming a praising ly. He managed to get rid of the clan markings on his cheeks as well. A little taller than normal. How long can you keep it active? Long enough. It's not like we'll have to hold the transformations all day. He nodded at her. And you? I haven't changed much. Hinata tied her long, and now brown, hair into a ponytail. Your eyes? That, and my hair. Those are my only standout features. Now I look like any other Leaf Village girl. Choji frowned. Don't put yourself down like that. People are more than just their features. That's not what I meant. Hinata smiled, but thank you, Choji. He nodded firmly and they set off, forced to run for a little while to catch up to Naruto. With Hinata's Byakugan, they found him easily. At the end of the paved path, he took a left into the brush and they followed him to the river, hiding until he crossed it and vanished into the thicket before following. What was the point in our disguises? Choji asked. There's no one around. Hinata didn't respond for a moment and walked up a tree to perch on one of its long branches. Naruto was moving faster than ever before. In case we get caught, I don't want Naruto to know it's us. It might push him away. But it's not like we're letting him catch us in the first place. These transformations are just a waste of chakra. We'll stop using them when he stops moving, said Hinata. Then we'll corner him and try and figure out why he's been avoiding us all week. But wouldn't that also push him away? Not that I don't want to ask Naruto a few questions of my own, but using disguises to just talk to him might send the wrong message. I'm not sure what the right message is at this point. He's the one who decided not to contact us. Choji hummed noncommittally. Naruto stopped at a clearing a little bit ahead of where they were. It was surrounded by trees on all sides and the grass was overgrown. Stop, she hissed. There's someone else with Naruto and he's got a lot of chakra. Do you recognize them? Hinata took a closer look. He looks familiar, but I don't remember where I know him from. Describe him. Tall, black hair, standard Chunin gear, a beard, tan skin. She waited a moment, and he's smoking. There's hundreds of shinobi who fit that description. Not many with Jonin level chakra reserves. Choji almost fell off the branch. How does Naruto know a Jonin? I'm not sure. Hinata frowned. I don't like it. Naruto doesn't have any parents or family, so there's no one stopping the Jonin from taking advantage of him. Can you get us closer? I can't see anything and I doubt you can lip read. Oh, also cut the disguises. I don't know if he's a censor, but Jonin are scary. We don't want to use chakra around him. Right, there's a cluster of trees back there we can hide behind. Come on. Given that there was a Jonin present, the two of them had to carefully circle back to reach their hiding spot, all without alerting him. It was a slow and painful process where any noise sent a spike through Hinata's heart. The rustle of leaves had never sounded so scary to her before. Still, they reached the spot and allowed themselves a moment to relax. Unfortunately, because of how long it took for them to get there, they arrived when Naruto and the Jonin were in mid-conversation. Today's not going to be fun, said the Jonin. He had his back towards them, but because he was so tall, he was blocking Naruto from view. It's going to be pretty painful, so don't be afraid of telling me if it becomes too much. I can do it. No, I have to. There's no half-assing this, Asuma. Hinata was surprised at the steel in his voice. The last time she heard it was when she first spoke to him and he gave her a much-needed piece of advice. She liked to think that their friend group had been good for Naruto. When he first joined the academy, he was cold and closed off. He never spoke to anyone and responded to the animosity from the teachers with equal fervor. When it came to the rest of them, all they got was indifference. The idea that Naruto could become like that again wasn't something she liked. Asuma, Choji gasped. I know him. He's the son of Lord Third and the Sarutobi head's little brother. Wait, recognition bloomed in her mind and Hinata widened her eyes. I remember him. We saw him at the play. She looked back at Asuma Sarutobi, Jonin of the Leaf and son of the Hokage. What could he want with Naruto? I don't know, Hinata, said Choji, sounding a great deal less concerned than before. But by the looks of it, he's probably training Naruto. It's fine. My clan's got a really good relationship with the Sarutobi. This is going to be great for him, I promise. Would it? Hinata doubted that Asuma Sarutobi was plotting something nefarious, but Naruto was the sort to get carried away. She knew because she used to spend almost all her time around him. Naruto and her would often spend entire days training, talking about training, or analyzing their performance during training. Not that she thought it was a bad thing to do, but for Naruto, it was all he did. More and more she started to think that training served as his break from the mundane world, rather than the mundane world acting as a break from his training. Choji? What is it? I don't think he's avoiding us. What do you mean? He frowned. We haven't seen him for a week and he hasn't tried to contact us. What else could he be doing? Hinata clutched her chin. Think about it. Remember during the summer break when Naruto completely forgot about us for a little bit because of his training? Yeah? What if this is another one of those times? Maybe his fight with Shikamaru was too uncomfortable for him to confront, so he threw himself into training and just forgot about it all. Forgot about Shikamaru, forgot about me, and forgot about you. I think. Choji trailed off, looking around at the forest, and then at Asuma's back. I think that it doesn't change a thing. Why? There was real anger in his voice now. No matter which one it is, he's still a bad friend. Whether he really did forget about us or is avoiding us on purpose, it doesn't change anything I intend on doing. And what do you intend on doing? Hinata asked. I'm going to find Naruto and tell him. Again. They flinched and looked into the clearing. Naruto and Asuma Sarutobi stood further ahead in front of the stump of a tree. It was about as tall as Asuma and its other half lay horizontally on the ground to the right of them. Naruto stood at the ready, his fists wrapped in layers of. She took a closer look and realized it was linen, and that he was beginning to sport bruises on his knuckles. Naruto slammed his fist into the stump without hesitation. He didn't make a sound, but Hinata saw the way his eyebrows twitched when he inhaled sharply through his nose. Again. He hit the stump even harder with almost perfect technique, leveraging more of his weight into the blow. Again. Hinata gritted her teeth. The sight reminded her too much of her taijutsu lessons with her father. Palm techniques were the Hyuga's main weapon, which required their hands to become weapons sharper and more lethal than any blade. Conditioning was also something they did daily at the academy where they went through the forms of the Leaf's basic taijutsu style on training logs. However, Naruto was taking it too far, way too far. Again. He slammed his fist into the log, and when he pulled it back, bloody dots had begun to seep through the ivory fabric. Naruto didn't stop. At Asuma's calls, he slammed his fist into the log over and over again. Shoji looked squeamish as the exercise went on, and even Hinata found herself frowning. Enhanced. Hinata wondered what the change in command meant. Naruto closed his eyes and took a breath. The wind picked up, drawing a soft breeze across the clearing. He snapped his eyes open and punched, driving his weight forward. The stump cracked and groaned, giving way to Naruto's fist burying itself halfway into the stump. What the hell? Shoji whispered. Hinata, what's he doing? He hasn't used chakra like that before. Maybe he's applying chakra repulsion differently, she mused, activating her Byakugan. Asuma Sarutobi circled the stump and stood in front of Naruto. Harder. The goal of today is to see how far you can push it while keeping control of your chakra. And if we get a dislocation like last time? Naruto asked dryly. Hinata frowned and mouthed, dislocation? You won't, said the Jonin. You know what you're doing now. When I say crank it up, I don't want you to stupidly pump chakra through your body. Carefully guide it and let it explode out of the necessary tenketsu only at the last moment. Naruto nodded and raised his fists. Hinata watched the flow of swirling chakra move from his gut up his chest and down his shoulder. At the same time, he went through the motions of a punch, guiding it down his arm. She peered closer, almost leaning forward in anticipation. When he threw the punch, the gathered chakra exploded out of his fist, both empowering the actual blow and acting as an attack on its own. Now that she was looking at it, the punch itself wasn't enhanced, as Asuma Sarutobi said, but a setup for a delayed chakra attack. Choji blinked owlishly at the rough, fist-sized hole carved into the top of the stump. Can you explain that, please? Hinata raised an eyebrow. I could, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Super strength? Basically, she said. He leaned back onto his palms and chuckled. Damn. Hinata was inclined to agree. She wasn't confident enough in her chakra control to pull off an enhancement of that kind of magnitude, but she was sure she'd be able to do it one day. The gentle fist did the same thing, just with less chakra, and aimed at disabling tenketsu instead of pulverizing the target. Watching Naruto destroy chunks of the thick trunk with every punch was so mesmerizing that it almost made her forget that he was destroying his hands. He pulled his arm back, clenched his jaw, and threw his entire body forward. His fist collided with the deep indent he pummeled into the bark, and it exploded in a burst of wood chips and dust. Naruto stood still, the blood leaking through the linen wraps and dripping onto the floor. All right, that's enough, said Asuma. Naruto sounded breathless and there was a hysterical lilt to his voice. How did I do? I think I did all right. It wasn't as strong as I imagined, but that's fine. I have a lot of chakra and can probably make it stronger. He tightened the wraps, completely oblivious to his mangled and bloody fists. What are we doing next? He lightly thumped the top of Naruto's head. Next, you're going to get your hands looked at by a medic. What? I don't need a medic. I'll be great after a good night's sleep. Naruto tightened the bandages around his hands. Don't know why, but my body heals quickly. I'm not stupid, Asuma. I know my limits. I haven't broken anything and hit them just hard enough to condition my knuckles. Hinata didn't believe him, so she took a look at his knuckles for herself. They were bruised and bloody, but not broken. It should have been relieving, but Naruto being completely aware of what he was doing to himself scared her even more than the alternative. If you didn't, I would have stopped you, but I needed to make sure you weren't overextending yourself, said Asuma. Now, get out of here. We'll be sparring next week, so make sure you rest. No training at all today, and make sure you don't go overboard afterwards. Keep it light. Naruto gave a lazy two-fingered salute and vanished into the canopy. Choji released a sigh and stared at Hinata. I take it back. This is not going to be great for him, not with the way he is now. He doesn't know when to stop. He got up and climbed onto a branch. Come on, let's go and catch up to him. Hinata nodded numbly, scanning the forest. She found him hopping between branches, swinging from tree to tree as if his hands weren't injured. He didn't seem to be in pain, nor did he express any discomfort to Asuma. Naruto wasn't like this before. Sure, he was obsessed with training, but he was the first person to make sure she took proper breaks, stayed hydrated, and watched out for injuries. What had made him so reckless? How about you two come and talk to me instead of running around in circles? You're friends with Naruto, right? Choji looked down at her with wide eyes. She stood petrified for a few moments, looking at the silent question in his eyes. Running wasn't even an option. He would catch up to them in an instant. But if they stayed, who knew when they'd find Naruto again? What's it going to be, kids? Hinata looked up at Choji. Let's talk to him. What about Naruto? Asked Choji, looking ready to leap into the forest. This is our chance. Would he even listen to us? Do you know how many times we brought up his training habits to him before? She shook her head. He apologizes, but he never really changes. Asuma Sarutobi is his teacher. Maybe it's sad, but I think that Naruto is more likely to listen to him than he is us. Choji searched her face. So, what are you saying? I think we should tell his teacher everything we're worried about and have him bring Naruto to us. We shouldn't have to chase him around just to have a conversation, Choji. I know, he replied, landing beside her. All right, we'll talk with him. Hinata nudged his shoulder. You'll have to talk to him first, you know. What, why? Because you're the one who said your clan has a good relationship with the Sarutobi. Yeah, the clan, my father, not me, said Choji. I don't know the guy. Well, you're at a better starting point than me. She nudged him forward. Go. He looked back and glared at her. Hinata held his gaze until he sighed in defeat. Thank you, Choji. He threw his hands up behind him as they emerged from the thicket. Asuma stood head on, his arms folded, and carefully assessed them as they got closer to him. Hello, sir? Choji stumbled over his words and took a moment to gather himself. I'm Choji Akimichi and my friend is Hinata Hyuga. I think I can tell, said Asuma, smiling. You've got the markings and she has the Byakugan. I'd like to know why you guys are stalking my student. He can be a bit of a stick in the mud, but I don't think he's the type to be an asshole, is he? No, nothing like that, sir. Drop it, sir, kid. Just Asuma is fine. I was never one for formalities. Asuma, then, we're Naruto's friends. He raised his eyebrows in amusement. Friends that stalk each other? When said friend avoids us when something goes wrong, yes. Hinata stepped forward and accepted the burden of Asuma's curiosity. He had a big fight with another friend of ours about a week ago. Since then, he's vanished. He hasn't been in school all week, but because he's at the top of the class, none of the teachers are complaining all that much, but we know he's not okay. At first, we thought it was because he was embarrassed and was taking time off to gather his thoughts, said Choji. The friend he fought with was the same, but he was at least willing to be around us at school. And now, asked Asuma, why do you think he's avoiding you? We think he's avoiding us because he's forgotten about us, said Hinata. Naruto was always the kind of person to get carried away and lose track of things. He takes training to a completely different level. He's obsessed with it. Last summer, Choji interjected, talking faster and faster. He took a week off from his morning runs with me to apparently work on his chakra control. He never asked how I felt about it, and sure he apologized, but something similar happened not even a month later. The Jonin was openly frowning, and Hinata could see the displeasure on his face. But that doesn't mean he's a bad friend. The fight with our other friend happened because Naruto gave him genuine advice, but because he was too immature to take it and grow, he lashed out at Naruto, who did the same. Hinata ignored Choji's glaring. Shikamaru was wrong to slap Naruto's help away. Naruto just loses track of his priorities sometimes. Even without Choji's pointed staring, she knew how flimsy the argument sounded, but Naruto wasn't a bad person. Hinata knew that. He helped her when no one else would, and it seemed that now, she had her chance to do the same. Don't excuse it. To her surprise, it wasn't Choji who said those words, but Asuma. Something that looked awfully similar to regret flashed across his face for just a moment. He put training over you. Exactly, said Choji, nodding firmly. That doesn't mean we don't want to be friends with him, though. He's still one of my best friends, just not a very good one at the moment. Yeah, said Hinata. Asuma folded his arms. The clearing was quiet for a few moments. Choji and Hinata squirmed nervously under his gaze, forced to remain still until he gave his verdict. Okay, thanks for bringing this to me. I understand that he can take training too far, and I knew something had happened with a friend of his because he complained about Inara when I first met him. I'm guessing that's the mutual friend? They both nodded. I'll make sure he stops avoiding you. There's no excuse for it, especially since it seems like all you two want to do is help him. Whether he's avoiding you on purpose or by accident doesn't matter. He's still in the wrong at the end of the day. She made sure to look away from Choji's triumphant brown eyes. What are your names again? Asked Asuma. Hinata gave him a shallow bow. I'm Hinata Hyuga. It's a pleasure to meet you, Jonin Sarutobi. I've changed my mind. Naruto might be a stick in the mud, but you're an entire tree. Asuma chuckled and Choji joined him. You're an Akimichi, but I want to know which one. I'm Choji. All right then. Thanks for bringing this to me, Hinata, Choji. I'll make sure that Naruto knows exactly how you two feel. He frowned for a moment before his easygoing smile returned, and I'll be giving him a piece of my mind too. She wondered whether they got Naruto into trouble with his teacher, but quickly shook the thought free. It wasn't her fault that he decided to go dark on them, and she didn't intend on running into his Jonin teacher. As far as she was concerned, it was Naruto's fault. Do you think it'll work? Asked Choji on the way back to the village. Hinata hummed. I don't know. None of our talks with Naruto have worked. True. But, she smiled. I think that this has the highest chance of working. It's a Jonin, after all. Choji laughed. Also true. She hoped it would work. Hinata enjoyed Naruto's friendship. She valued his company, and Choji most likely thought the same. That said, continuing a friendship with someone who obviously didn't value them was a foolish thing to do. And if there was something Hinata Hyuga was not, it was a fool. The Cycle of Hatred. A Naruto insert. Chapter 2.11, 21. Published by Scribble Hub. Chapter 2.11, 21. Now that I was cooling down and the adrenaline was fading, I shuddered at how easily the wind slipped past my t-shirt, chilling me to the bone. I rose slowly, feeling every muscle strain at the most basic movements. It was a slow process, but the soreness was invigorating. Thanks to that pain, I could feel just how much I was progressing with each training session. Let's call it a day here, said Asuma, looking like he hadn't fought me for 40 minutes straight. He snorted at my struggles to sit up. I need to increase your endurance training. If you're this spent after a spar, I'm scared to imagine what'll happen in the field. I'm this spent because of that endurance training you put me through before the sparring, or have you forgotten about it? I hissed, partly out of pain but also because of how damn smug he sounded. He fingered his ear. All I'm hearing are the complaints of a scrub. The heat in my chest swelled, but I stopped myself from saying something that would have the man tease me endlessly. Asuma was a great teacher, but he was also childish, petty, and a sloth dressed as a human being. Since you haven't made a smart-ass remark yet, I'm guessing you agree. Great. He took a seat in front of me, crossing his legs in the grass. Wait, I said, adjusting myself so I was cross-legged too. I've got a question. Why are low-rank ninjutsu so weak? Like, not that it's not. Blunt force is great when you've got massive chakra reserves, but on average, low-rank ninjutsu aren't all that damaging. That's a loaded question. I tilted my head in confusion and he raised a finger. Ninjutsu aren't assigned ranks based solely on their strength. There are some pretty powerful D and C rank jutsu, after all. Strength aside, there are a few other factors that contribute to a jutsu's overall rank. The raw chakra requirement, the degree of chakra control, the jutsu's difficulty, which can be because of the previous two factors, but also the number of hand signs, and lastly, its actual strength. Also, I'm gonna caveat this by saying we're talking strictly about offensive jutsu. Other ninjutsu categories have their own criteria. Low-rank ninjutsu are weak because they use wind pressure. That's not an inherent weakness, mind you, but because they're low-ranked, the pressure they exert isn't all that damaging. Are the other nature releases the same? I asked. You can make low-rank ninjutsu more powerful by using more chakra than the activation amount, but I'm not talking about that. What do you mean then? I scratched my head. I guess I'm trying to ask whether or not the other low-rank nature release jutsu are also weak. Yes and no. They counter one another regardless of rank. See, nature releases inherently lean more toward defense or defense. Fire and lightning are the most offensive, while earth is the most defensive. Wind and water are more neutral and are equally good at both. That said, that doesn't mean offensive or defensive elements can't be used oppositely either. All low-ranked jutsu are lowly ranked because they're easier to use than, say, AB ranked jutsu. Huh, I shrugged and sighed disappointedly. I guess having wind as my primary affinity was a case of real bad luck, Whoa, Asuma frowned. Wind is perfectly good at what it does, especially once you get out of scrub territory. Really? I grinned, because all I'm hearing are the complaints of a scrub. It took a few moments for the joke to land, and I saw it in the way his expression collapsed into this one dry stare. Ha, ha, very funny, kid. I try. All nature releases are dangerous. In the end, whether or not they're initially better at offense or defense doesn't matter. Asuma shifted so that he was sitting more comfortably. Right, let me paint a picture for you. Nature releases have their entry-level status, right? Wind knocks things back but loses power as you go out of range. Earth is only good for defense because it's slow and rigid and so on. But none of that matters once you master an element. I'll start with wind since we've got the same primary affinity. The reason why low-rank wind jutsu use wind pressure is because it's just easier to do when you're unskilled. He spun one of his trench knives around a finger. Once you get the cutting factor down, it's lethal. His explanation made sense. Even in situations where an opponent's element countered another's, mastery of your element could mean the difference between life and death, especially in situations like that. What about the other elements, then? Water's basically got the same deal as wind, it's just more solid, which comes with its ups and downs. Earth lets you manipulate its consistency, lightning shocks less and pierces more, and fire, well, it gets hotter. Asuma could see the smile crawling across my face. If I hear another word about me being a scrub, I'll make you do supersets next week. Fire's plenty cool, Naruto. Like the other nature releases, there are visual tells to see whether your opponent's mastered it. Regular orange flames turn white hot, and beyond that, a little bit blue. Blue flames, I blinked as an interesting detail came to mind. The Jinchuriki of the two tails, Yugito ni. What about her? Asuma asked. Her flames are blue. That mean anything? It was only for a moment, but the playfulness vanished from his eyes. His usually amused brown eyes were cautious, but I stared back completely unfazed. I understood why he was being careful, but my question was completely genuine. Plus I couldn't reveal that I knew I was a Jinchuriki because where would I have got that knowledge? Blaming the villagers would be a big leap since there was no way for me to verify that information. Thankfully, it was just for a moment. Asuma leaned back on his palms. It's an ability of the two tails, also known as the blazing hellcat. Its command of flame is second to none in the entire world, human or otherwise, and that extends to its Jinchuriki. Cool, I replied. I wanted to inquire about the other Jinchuriki, if only to make sure they were still alive, but that would be pushing it. Asuma was a good teacher, and I enjoyed being around him. Asking for too much too soon would only make our training sessions awkward and risk scaring him away. It wasn't like he didn't know my identity, so there'd be a better time for questions like that. The clearing only grew colder as the sun continued to set. I felt the moment come to an end and stood up, brushing grass off my trousers. I'm gonna head home. I need to be up early tomorrow. Oh, said Asuma, I forgot that you've got school. Wow. He rolled his eyes. Come on, you're the one who chose to play hooky for a week. Because they couldn't teach me the things I wanted to learn. You'll have to go back eventually, kid. I sighed. Yep. Asuma snorted and cleared the ground, landing on a thick branch and giving me a lazy salute. By the way, next week's session won't be on Saturday. It'll be on Sunday instead. I'll see you then, and you better have returned to school. What happens if I don't? I asked, more to be petulant than anything else. He vanished, bursting out of the top of the tree moments later and blending with the forest in no time. I started the lonely trek home, crossing the river, and exiting the park. My limbs were dead weight, requiring twice the effort to move. At the same time, I felt weightless. It was the strange kind of paradox that occurred if you waited long enough after doing something physically intense. Landing on the rooftop of my apartment complex, I scaled the railing attached to its side, stopping just before the drop to my door. There was a man in front of it, but because of the angle, I couldn't see his face. His hair was tied back, and he was at least a chunin based on his vest. Who are you and what are you doing in front of my house? I asked, still suspended from the balcony. Naruto? The man looked up and I almost released the grip I had on the railing. Uruka-sensei? Come down from there, please. I'd like to talk to you. He smiled, crinkling the faded trail of the scar on his nose. Why don't you come in? I asked, unlocking the door. Can I get you anything? Tea, water, orange juice? Uruka shook his head. No, it's late and I wouldn't want to impose. If you say so. I stopped halfway across my apartment's threshold, backtracked, and closed the door. Not to be impolite, but why are you here, sensei? I'm here to talk about your attendance. He nodded pointedly at my grimacing. You've been gone for almost 2 weeks and as your homeroom teacher, I've come as the bearer of bad news. A week and a half. I gave him a tight-lipped smile. And yeah, that's fair. Before I deliver the bad news, is there anything I should know about? Some kind of extenuating reason that I can give you a pass for? No, not really, I replied. I took time off school. I wasn't sick, stressed, and definitely didn't have a family emergency. My joke didn't land, making Uruka frown instead. Why'd you do it then? Skip school? I shrugged. It was getting to a point where all the sparring drama was becoming too much, so I decided I wanted out for a bit. What about all the schoolwork you missed? I raised an eyebrow. Sensei, we both know classwork is the least of my worries. I could probably do the end-of-year exams now and pass. Even then, you can't just pick and choose when you attend, Naruto. The academy is a commitment and privilege. Each year, hundreds of kids fail to pass the entrance exam and, if offered, they take your spot in a heartbeat. I know, I said. Really, I do. But would you believe me if I told you this week has been more useful for my growth in the last couple of months? His lips formed into a small frown that pulled down at the corners, yet I could see the conflict in his eyes. This won't become the norm, will it? I shook my head. I'm serious. I'm not sure you'll be eligible for Rookie of the Year if your attendance takes another hit like this. You've already been docked a few points off your final grade. How much? We're deducting 5 points off whatever you get at the end of the year. That could be an entire grade. His words were almost enough to make me laugh. Almost. I never really cared about the title or the marks in the first place. Still, I stood straight and nodded firmly. I promise, sir. You'll see me once the weekend's out. Uruka looked me over like he was probing for weakness, searching for a chink in my armor to exploit. When he didn't find one, he pushed off the railing and placed a hand on my shoulder. I hope so. Here's the work you missed. I expect it on my desk a week from now. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, Naruto. I didn't enter my house until you walked onto the street 3 stories below my apartment and vanished around a corner. The envelopes containing the amount I owed for gas and electricity lay on the welcome mat on my feet. I leaned down and picked them up with a grimace, laying them atop the folder Uruka had given me. The village, in other words, Lord Third, only gave me the money for my monthly expenses, but I didn't have to pay any rent and wouldn't until I became a genin. Thankfully, with my monthly wage and the money Lord Third delivered personally on the first of every month, living expenses weren't worrying. That said, the sight of bills never failed to annoy me. I spent the rest of the evening paying said bills, cooking dinner, and cleaning the house. At school, I mostly found myself zoning out, through no fault of the actual academy, but after a couple of lessons from Asuma, I just couldn't look at it with any real degree of seriousness anymore. Perhaps that was a good thing. It helped me not take things so personally because I'd gone right back to where I was at the beginning of the first year. I wasn't unbeatable, and my classmates weren't weak, but I had a few more tools under my belt that let me breathe a little easier. I realized halfway through history that this is probably what life was like for the clan kids and grinned, until I realized Sasuke could probably still beat me and he'd been training alone since he was 7. Oddly enough, I didn't mind so much. Finding a source of knowledge had put my mind at ease because my growth was assured now. Whether or not Sasuke beat me didn't matter anymore because it was never really about him. So imagine my surprise when the opportunity to do so fell right into my lap on the first sparring session of that week. A good dozen or so matches had gone by when Aruka called Sasuke and I to the stand. The class seemed pretty excited because apparently, he'd gone on a week-and-a-half-long win streak that had irritated everyone who wasn't his unwanted fan club. He walked slightly ahead of me as we moved away from the class. I hung back, squeezing through the crowd that had formed away from the fan club while I figured out how I'd approach the spar. Enhanced strikes were completely off the table. I wasn't strong enough to regulate them to non-lethal levels. However, that didn't mean I was completely helpless. Knowing Sasuke, he wasn't one to take things easy. Right, this will be the final spar of the day. Are you two ready? Aruka asked, raising his arm high. Begin. I didn't want to deal with his shuriken jutsu. Ninja wires were a given with him, so I threw aside all subterfuge by moving into a drop step and blasting forward. My chakra control hadn't changed much in 2 weeks, but the way I went about using chakra repulsion couldn't be more different. Sasuke was surprised but gathered himself quickly enough to dodge my attacks. I braced myself, anticipating his first strike, but he launched into a series of rapid punches rather than just the one. I weaved and dodged, feeling the wind from his fists grazing my skin. Finding an opening, I countered with a swift jab to his shoulder. He was quick to deflect, smoothly transitioning into a low sweep that caught me off guard. I stumbled, regaining my footing just in time to block his follow-up kick and lunge forward, aiming a roundhouse kick at his head. Sasuke ducked beneath the blow, his movements fluid as he countered with another sweep. I fell into a backwards roll and retaliated with 3 kicks that I used to return to a standing position. Sasuke reached into his back pouch and I made the split-second decision to throw a kunai at him. He hopped back and it hit the ground, having struck nothing, but it bought me time. He was going for his pouch again, and while he managed to pull out a shuriken, he didn't have enough range to throw it, making the weapon more of a liability than anything else. I aimed almost exclusively for the left side of his body and he was forced to take more than a few hits to keep the shuriken in his hands. Stupidly, though, I'd fallen into a rhythm that Sasuke figured out after a few exchanges. That particular mistake earned me a fancy, one-arm backflip kick to the face. I ran my tongue along my teeth, licking the thin blood trail across my bottom lip. Great, I muttered, springing forward to dodge the metal star. Landing atop my kunai from earlier, I pulled it off the ground and rolled to the side, standing slightly askew. Sasuke threw another kunai after me and reeled in the ninja stars, but instead of backing away, I ran towards him. He stared incredulously, only making me grin. Once he realized I wasn't going to stop, he discarded the ninja wire and threw a handful of shuriken that he multiplied with the shuriken clone jutsu, stopping me in my tracks. I jumped out of the way, letting the weapons pass and resumed my run. When I looked back, Sasuke was winding up to throw what looked like way too many wire-guided shuriken, his small smirk growing into an excited grin. I planted my feet and smiled back, watching the spinning metal race towards me and work through a little under a dozen hand seals, dragging in as much air as I could. My lungs expanded and I felt like I'd burst at any moment, but I held it in, the chill of the air in my lungs, the warmth of my chakra, the anticipation, all of it. With my chakra control, learning jutsu wasn't difficult. I was sure that would change depending on the chakra control requirement, but I was never going to be known for my chakra control anyway. No, my problem was always finding someone willing to teach me jutsu. Thanks to Asuma, that wasn't a problem for me anymore. Leaning over, I released a focused gust, destroying the shuriken's momentum. They clattered uselessly to the ground in front of me, and while he was staring at me in open-mouthed shock, I blasted off the ground and punched Sasuke squarely in the jaw, holding a kunai over his throat. Surprisingly, he looked far from pissed at the loss and even let me help him up. I suppose you haven't been slacking, he grunted. Nope, I replied. So, what did you think about the new jutsu? Pretty cool, right? He picked up all his shuriken and secured the ninja wire. So, your affinity is wind. Yep, found that one out recently by buying chakra paper. I watched his face twist in derision at the mention of chakra paper and smiled. Yeah, chakra paper's a gimmick that shinobi peddle to rich people to make some money. There are better ways for shinobi to find out their affinity that doesn't cost an arm and a leg, but as far as time and money go, chakra paper's not bad. My clan, I watch over one of those training sites. The Temple of Fire, right? Is it true that the fires there are always burning? A dark look flashed across his face. Yes, it's an Uchiha's responsibility to keep them alight using the fireball jutsu. Do you know it? Sasuke scoffed, but there wasn't any malice behind it. Step aside. I gestured, giving him a wide berth to demonstrate the fireball jutsu. He stood straight and started to gather chakra through the confrontation seal, but that was as far as he got. Wait, Aruka came running across the field, stopping directly in front of Sasuke and I. Stop, you two. It's wonderful that you're both capable of nature release ninjutsu at your age, but you'll demoralize your classmates if you go any further. Let's call it a day, yeah? Scoffing again, Sasuke started to walk away but stopped abruptly. What's the matter? Aruka asked. He looked at me, looking like he wanted to say something. I squashed the urge to shake my head and smiled. It was a good spar, Sasuke. He nodded and continued walking away. Naruto, said Aruka after a moment. Where did you learn that jutsu? Whatever lie I was going to tell would have to be good, and the best kind of lies were those that had a little bit of the truth. I was training in a park during my week off and a shinobi happened to see me. I don't know who she was, or what rank she was because she was in casual wear, but we made a bet. She lost, so I made her teach me a jutsu. She didn't actually think I'd be able to do it, though. Aruka wasn't a genius, but he wasn't an idiot either. He looked suspicious of my excuse, but still sent me away without pushing further. On the walk back, I enjoyed the class reactions a little more than I should have. Tomio looked like he wanted to eat a hat and Sasuke's fan club was torn between singing his praises for accepting defeat so gracefully and staring at me as if I dropped out of the sky. Naruto, Ino bounded towards me as we all walked out of school that afternoon, falling into step to my left while ignoring the glares from Sasuke's fan club. That was amazing. Thanks, I smiled, mind racing for the best way to end our conversation. You know nature release ninjutsu. I don't think there's anyone in our class who does. I scratched the back of my head. Sasuke does. Which one? The fireball jutsu. She blinked before slapping her palm against her forehead. Duh, I forgot he's an Uchiha. Damn it, now Sakura won't ever shut up. That's pretty cold of you, princess. I know he's the last of his clan and all, but damn. Shikamaru glanced over at us, focusing on Ino as opposed to me. I'm sorry, Naruto, said Ino with a forced smile on her face. But I'm going to go deal with him. I smiled back. Feel free. Nodding as if my blessing counted as permission to go and argue with him, she marched away, rolling up her sleeves. Not too long after that, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned, expecting it to be him, but it was Hinata instead. I smiled. Hey, there, it's been a while. Hinata didn't smile back, which threw me off a little. She led me away from the class to Choji, who looked unhappy, to say the least. What's wrong with you two? I asked. What's wrong? Choji asked, sounding hurt. You avoid us for ages, and then ask us what's wrong. He had a point, one that I was beginning to grasp, but it was too little too late now. They were already upset, but I couldn't go back in time and unpanic myself to hang out with them. This is going to sound bad, but bear with me, I said. I didn't avoid you guys. On purpose, finished Hinata, folding her arms. We realized. Choji frowned, and it doesn't matter. Our point is that this isn't the first or even the third time you've done this. We always come second to your training. It makes us feel unwanted. Oh, or that we exist as your friends only when you want us around. It's not fair. No, it's not, and I'm sorry I hurt you guys, but believe me, I had an actual problem to deal with last week. It might look like I was avoiding you just to train, but it wasn't that either. Or else why would I have stopped coming to school? Then why? Asked Hinata. We're your friends, aren't we? You're supposed to come to us if you have a problem so we can solve it together. Choji nodded. You don't have to be alone, man. Instead of making me feel relieved, their words had almost the opposite effect. The sentiment was nice, and nothing either of them had said was wrong. I enjoyed the brief respite of hanging out with my friends, but to be friends with someone required more than just spending time together. It required honesty, loyalty, and the willingness to speak uncomfortable truths. Were these two ready for all the uncomfortable truths? No, I doubted they'd ever be, but if I never gave them the opportunity and kept soldiering on by myself, what point was there in calling them my friends? I was tired of dealing with everything alone. Anytime something went wrong, I had no one to turn to because my problems were always things the people I cared about had no business knowing. Obito, Orochimaru, the Akatsuki, the Fourth Shinobi World War. More than that, I was tired of defending myself against these two, who were too immature to understand that maybe my reasons for not being there were more than just being a training addict. But maybe, they could learn. Not the whole truth but part of it, maybe. Fine, I frowned and took a deep breath and picked up the pace. Come with me. They looked at each other but followed me deep into the nearest park. I walked far enough that we passed by all the kids rushing home after the school day, deeper and deeper until I was satisfied. Hinata, look around with you, Byakugan, please. Is there anyone nearby? She took a moment to gather chakra and when she opened her eyes, they glowed with an otherworldly light, veins bulging across her face. No, there's no one except us. I swallowed, noticing my throat was uncomfortably dry. You guys want the truth? A wan chuckle escaped from my throat. Truth is, I'm a Jinchuriki, a living sacrifice, basically. I have been since the day I was born. I lied to all of you. My birthday isn't October 9th, it's October 10th, and the last thing the fourth Hokage did before dying was seal the nine-tailed fox inside of me. That's, Choji trailed off, mouth open. Insane, right? I sighed, hating the bitterness charging my words but not moving to stop it in any way. My childhood sucked, you too. Before leaving the orphanage I had to fight with kids almost weekly because they'd heard whispers from adults about me being a monster. Of course, that only made things worse and Lord Third ended up giving me an apartment to stop them from bothering me. Except, I chuckled, that didn't happen. The point is, I'm tired of pretending my life's okay. It's not. Things are better now, but that doesn't erase the years that weren't. You two are both clan heirs so you wouldn't understand. Whenever you have a problem, you can go right to your parents, or some elder to help. Me, I'm that one monster the village hates without parents or siblings. Everything I learned on my own. You can attest to that, can't you, Hinata? I looked the girl in the eye until she looked away. Sure, I felt bad about weaponizing what were otherwise really heartwarming moments between us where we developed the beginnings of my chakra enhancement, but I had to make sure she understood that the both of them did. After hiding or avoiding voicing my thoughts for so long, just this small grain of truth felt liberating. There was something nice, even with the circumstance, about having people to voice the truth to. I'd been alone for so long I'd forgotten how it felt. Quite frankly, you guys are being selfish. The words continued pouring out of my mouth, and I had no desire to stop. Friendship's a two-way street. You want me to share my problems, cool, but now that you know them, what the hell can either of you do to make them better? As expected, they couldn't reply. I'd already made things better, but this was something they needed to hear. Maybe they'd also stop being my friends as Shikamaru had, but I'd at least imparted a meaningful lesson to them on my way out. Listen, I said, sighing, I'm not asking you guys to change the village for me or anything like that. It's not your responsibility, but you guys said I'm not sharing my problems, so here I am, sharing. If I said anything else, I'd only devolve into vitriol over my treatment at the hands of the village or potentially reveal things I shouldn't, so I took the white-hot negativity and shoved it back down. I stuck my hands in my pockets and started to walk away. Was it cowardly to run away before seeing their reaction? Probably, but I had no desire to face more rejection and fear. Not from people I counted as friends. And Naruto, it was Choji who had yelled. His face was twisted with indecision for a short moment, but he shook it off. Come to my place on Saturday morning. We'll have an answer for you then. But this thing between you and Shikamaru, it's gone on for too long. You've caught us in between the both of you, said Hinata. She looked away for a moment, and when her eyes returned to me, they didn't waver. What you revealed to us was something, but if there's one thing that we can help you with, it's this. I stopped for a moment and thought the offer over. Fine, I'll be there. The Cycle of Hatred. A Naruto insert. Chapter 2.12, 22. Published by Scribble Hub. Chapter 2.12, 22. Life was full of revelations this week. Most had come solely from and around one of his best friends. Most of the time, Shoji was a fan of surprises. The ones he was used to usually had something to do with good food, which was always welcome. Unfortunately, none of the week's news had anything to do with food. If that wasn't bad enough, the latest one had completely altered his worldview, which upset him more than he cared to admit. To him, the Leaf wasn't a terrible place. It housed bad people and good people, which was a given in life, but he liked to give people the benefit of the doubt and in doing so, found himself on the receiving end of the good more than the bad. Naruto wasn't always an amazing person to be around. Before the academy, Shoji didn't remember seeing him much and only heard about him from all the friend groups Naruto had been kicked out of. They all said the same things, that Naruto was mean and would beat you up if he caught you staring. Somehow, that turned into Naruto being a monster. He thought it was a reputation he'd garnered alone, but how could he have been so stupid? Those looks from the adults were more than just distaste, it was outright scorn. Nothing shy of him sending people to the hospital could do that. Turns out Naruto went a step further, bringing death and destruction, by proxy, they said. In truth, Shoji didn't know much about the 9 tails beyond a few facts. It was orange, as big as a mountain, and had 9 very destructive tails. It was a topic rarely brought up except for one specific day of the year, and even then, only to mourn lost loved ones. Jinchuriki were an even stranger concept to him. It wasn't a topic they'd covered in the academy yet, so he had to do a little digging on his own, though it wasn't anything a quick library search couldn't solve. Or so he thought. Books on the tailed beasts were rare in the Leaf, probably because of the tragedy of the 9-tailed knight. He journeyed to 3 different libraries, finding only one book on the topic, alongside sparse information on Jinchuriki, living prisons. The idea that Naruto, kind and caring Naruto, housed a creature like the 9 tails didn't make sense to him. To his regret, Shoji reassessed every detail in memory of his friend with intensity. How could he carry that kind of burden with a smile? The question troubled him while he worked to prepare his room for the day, sitting on the edge of his awareness as the tasks piled up. He got to vacuum cleaning, changing his bedsheets, rearranging his wardrobe, bringing his washing downstairs and separating them into piles, and all the mindless chores he could occupy himself with. As the Akamichi heir, he didn't have to do chores anyway, but with Naruto's confession, he felt like he needed something to do that wasn't sit down and think. He couldn't train because he was expecting guests soon, so chores it was. Surprisingly, it was pretty soothing, but only enough to take his mind off things for a little while. In the end, one fact remained. His perception of his best friend had shifted ever so slightly, the newfound knowledge casting a looming 9-tailed shadow over everything he'd ever known about him. Was the Leaf one big family if they excluded someone so important to its survival? How could Naruto go around with a big smile, pretending everything was okay? Shoji's walk slowed down as he approached his room, eyes wide. Naruto wasn't okay. He'd admitted as much, hadn't he? Regret flooded him at the thought and he accepted it with a faint smile. As much as he beat himself up about not noticing, Naruto was right. What could he do against an entire village of people who either actively loathed his friend's existence, or were ignorant of him? The morning dragged into early afternoon and the sunlight beaming through his bedroom window brought no clarity to mind. All he received were more answerless questions birthing complicated emotions. He sighed and started on the week's assignments, forcing his focus outward. Hinata was the first to arrive, as expected, and came to his room after greeting his parents. She sat on the edge of his bed, peering over at the desk while he wrote. His shoulder was heavy with her gaze and his mind was anywhere but on the work. So, he leaned back in the chair and looked at the ceiling. Are we gonna talk about it? Talk about what? Shoji turned around the spinning chair and stared at Hinata. She squirmed a little and looked away. He continued staring until she ran out of places and things to look at, her eyes turning to face him again. She smiled sadly. What is there to say, Shoji? Looking back, it was obvious. We never met anywhere he could be recognized, and if we did, it was always a park because everyone except Mr. Tucci and Yame hates him. Some friends we are, he said with a rueful chuckle. Does it change anything? What? Hinata smiled sadly, her eyes shining with a strange sadness despite her words. The knowledge, Naruto's still Naruto. Nothing we've done together with him is different, right? He's still my friend, said Choji, clenching his fists. But you know, the entire reason he exists is to keep it contained. That's not the kind of thing you forget. The village will never let him. She remained silent. How could he be so happy with everything that he is? I don't think he was happy at all, so that only makes me wonder how much of it, our friendship, was real. Quote, all of it, she replied. Nothing about knowing who Naruto is changes what we've gone through with him. It doesn't push aside everything that he is to us, Choji. How do you know that? Because, Hinata swallowed, blinking rapidly. When she opened her eyes, they glinted with unshed tears. Because I've known what he is the entire time we've been friends. Choji's stomach dropped. What? She took a moment to compose herself. My father, when he noticed I was going out to train with Naruto, he sent someone to find out what I was doing and, when he did, he called me to his study and told me about it. Why? He asked. It's not his secret. That's the kind of man my father is. Unlike before, her face was perfectly expressionless. His exact words were, as my heir, you will know exactly with whom you are associating, and only then will you decide. He floundered until his voice rediscovered itself. That's cruel, Hinata. To judge a person for something they can't control, it's so cruel. Are you calling my father a cruel man? And no, that's not what I meant. I was Jew. Because you wouldn't be wrong. That stopped his rushed apology. People can be cruel, like everyone who's cruel to Naruto, but they can be kind as well. My father shared Naruto's identity because he cared about me and didn't want me to suffer the village's cruelty like Naruto does. I still chose to be Naruto's friend anyway. I chose to find out who he was. You've done it in reverse, but does finding out what he has change anything? No, he stopped, digesting the full weight of her words. It doesn't. But it left him with an indescribable feeling, a constant, dragging weight in his chest. Was it because he knew what his friend was going through? He laughed quietly to himself. What's funny? I figured it out. He looked at his hands. It's because I can't do anything about it that I feel like this. It's not like his fight with Shikamaru. It's not a problem I can fix and, that hurts. Says who? What? Hinata frowned. Who says we can't fix it? Remember how Naruto was before we met him? Of course, how could I forget? Remember how hard it was to get him to meet us out of school the first time? Choji looked down. Now that he knew the reason for that, memories like that made him sad. Yeah. We did it anyway, and the time after that and the one after that. He stopped being so closed off and started having fun with us. She got up and jabbed him in the chest. After you invited him to eat lunch with you one day, he stopped disappearing. A weird warmth spread from the place Hinata had poked him and he started to smile. She was right, about all of it. They couldn't change what Naruto was, but they could be there for him when the world wasn't. They could show him that not everyone hated him and, maybe one day, that would get through to the rest of the village. Until then, he'd always have them. Thanks, Hinata. Choji looked up and grinned. Seriously, though, I think you should tell Naruto. Her smile quickly turned into a grimace, and the guilt returned to her eyes. Why yeah, I was planning to today, but I'm nervous. Why? She looked out the window. He was my first ever friend. What if he doesn't want to be friends with me anymore? He slapped a hand over his mouth, smothering a snicker. His eyes teared up, and the laugh burst out of him only when he couldn't hold it back anymore. Hinata drew her eyebrows together and glared. Clear hurt stretched across her face. I am sorry. Choji wiped his face. You're so dumb sometimes. If you think Naruto would ever stop being friends with you, you've got another thing coming. I can't tell you how he'll react, but if it were me, I'd appreciate being friends with you even more. Someone who looks past the obvious even if it's what everyone else sees. They're like finding a needle in a haystack. She stepped back, and to his surprise, flushed a deep crimson. What's wrong? And nothing. I just didn't expect you to say that, but I suppose you're straightforward enough to. And now it's my turn to thank you. She gave him a deep bow and her shoulder-length hair flopped over her face. Thank you, Choji, truly. You're welcome, but is the bowing really necessary? Shut it and take my gratitude. He laughed. Yes, ma'am. Naruto arrived 15 minutes later, and the ensuing conversation between him and Hinata went almost exactly as predicted. He was shocked, but not upset, silencing Hinata's profuse apologies with a smile. Something joined the three of them together then, bringing them closer than they'd been before. When Naruto looked at them, a different kind of gratitude shone in his blue eyes. That only made what he had to do next even harder. Choji cleared his throat. I'm sorry, but I won't pull any punches when Shikamaru gets here. Hinata winced. Yeah, I was sort of expecting it. Naruto shook his head. Don't worry, I'm willing to accept my fair share of criticism. The things I said that day were less than ideal. Hinata sniffed. That may be the case, but who was the first person to go below the belt? Hinata, Choji warned. Why? She glared. Why do you defend him when he was wrong, Choji? Can you honestly tell me that it's right to respond to offered help the way Shikamaru did? It's not that. You don't understand him. He sighed and looked at Naruto. Neither of you do. I'm not being biased because Shikamaru was my first ever friend, I swear. Hinata looked away. I'm being serious. He waited until she looked back. It's not about not doing hard work. It's not about hard work at all, but I'll let Shikamaru explain it when he gets here. The real problem isn't even the fight you two had, not to me. Naruto tilted his head. What's your problem with me and him, then? It's that neither of you wants to understand each other, Choji said tiredly. Hinata, you two, all three of you think your ways are the only way, and that everyone who doesn't do things like you is crazy, wrong, or both. Well, no one except Shikamaru ever says that bit out loud, but can you tell me you haven't thought like that before? At least I have the decency not to say it, said Hinata. I don't hate Shikamaru, and he's pleasant to be around, when he's not being an impolite, slothful human being. Choji raised an eyebrow and looked at Naruto expectantly. Naruto winced and smiled guiltily. Come on, you can't tell me you haven't thought that way before. Nobody's perfect, he laughed, but the difference between me and the three of you is that I accept that Shikamaru is the way he is because he wants to be. He's wasting his potential, said Hinata. You, of all people, should see that. Naruto folded his arms and watched him. If he wastes his potential, then that'll be his choice. I can talk to him but I can't force him, Choji said as he leaned back in his chair. I don't know, but maybe Shikamaru would listen to you if you guys listened to him. I'm guessing that's what we're doing today, said Naruto. Listening to Shikamaru? He smiled and let him make his guesses. Not too long afterwards, Shikamaru arrived, bringing with him 2 weeks of unaddressed awkwardness. Hinata was still seated at the foot of his bed. Naruto sat at its head, just behind the pillow, and Shikamaru decided to sit to the right of the wardrobe leaning against the wall. Choji moved his chair in front of the window, allowing himself to watch all three of them. Hinata looked as nervous as he felt but hid it behind her perfect posture. She tilted her chin upwards a little, as if she was balancing a stack of books on her head, while her eyes roamed the room. Shikamaru and Naruto refused to look at one another seemingly not out of lingering animosity, but guilt. It was a relief to see. At first, he was afraid that their friendship was dead in the water and didn't hold much hope for today's event, but the previous discussion and the sight of the two of them now was a relief. All he had to do was set the stage so that the two could talk, and maybe Hinata would learn a bit more about their lazy friend while they did. So, why was he sweating? He wiped the sheen of his forehead with the back of his hand, rubbing it on the outside of his thigh. He ignored the heat radiating off his body and tried for a smile. It felt like a grimace. Let's start with something easy. Shikamaru, how have you been this week? Me? He blinked. All right, I guess. It's just school, so it's not the most exciting of stuff. Hinata looked like she wanted to say something but pressed her knuckles against her lips. The sight made Choji smile a little. She was already taking their discussion to heart. Naruto, how's your week been? He asked after nodding at Shikamaru's answer. The blonde raised an eyebrow. Good. I went back to school, fought Sasuke, and beat Sasuke. All in all, a good week. Shikamaru bristled and then frowned. Calm down, man, said Naruto, frowning as well. I wasn't dragging up old drama. I was just happy that I finally beat someone who I've been struggling against for the longest. Is that so wrong? He sighed and leaned back against the wall. Nah. See, it's not old drama, said Choji. That's why we've called the two of you here. All eyes were on him now. First things first, I'm going to apologize to you, Shikamaru. Why? Because I lied to you. Last week, I said Naruto wouldn't be here. He spread his hands. But he's here because I think the two of you need to have a conversation. The conversation. No more running away from each other. No more insults and hurtful words. We've seen where that goes, said Hinata, looking at Shikamaru. Right? He held her gaze for a few seconds and looked away. The air between them was heavy. There was so much to say that no one could say anything. Naruto sighed. Shoji, not that I don't appreciate what you've done, but this isn't going to work. What do you mean? He asked. I think the idea is great. You've got the two of us in a room. He smiled tightly. But I think you and Hinata should give us some privacy. There are things that we can't say in front of either of you. These things might hurt to hear, but we have to say them. If you guys are here, we won't be able to. Weren't you the one who gave us a speech about saying and hearing uncomfortable truths? Asked Hinata. Shoji got up from the chair. He's going to say those truths, Hinata, but they're not meant for us. He walked over to his bedroom door and opened it, gesturing to Shikamaru. They're meant for him. Hinata sighed and walked out of the room, waiting for him outside its threshold. Can I at least trust that you'll be civil? Can't promise that, Hinata, but we'll do our best. Shoji, Naruto smiled at him and shifted halfway between the foot of the bed and the head. Thanks, man. I don't know if you hear this often, but you're a really dependable guy. Instead of replying, Shoji slammed the door shut, his ears burning. He could hear Naruto and Shikamaru's laughter from behind the door, and Hinata took one look at him before joining them. They entered the living room where his parents were watching some kind of nature documentary and sat down on the free couch facing the television. What's wrong? Asked his mother. Shoji grunted. She raised an eyebrow. Okay then, Hinata, why is he being all moody? Oh, she smiled. It's nothing, Mrs. Akamichi. We just learned your son doesn't take praise very well. His father looked at him and let out a booming laugh. My little man's as brave as they come, but when it comes to accepting his dues, he's as meek as a newborn calf. Dad, he groaned and slammed his face into his palms. Stop it. To his horror, his mother joined in and he could only hide his face from the world in the hopes they would stop. Shoji was never good with praise. He never felt like he deserved it because he was only doing the things he wished people did for him. Treating people in the way he wished to be treated. There wasn't anything praiseworthy about it. He looked up at the ceiling. His two best friends were somewhere up there. Were they listening to each other, or were they just arguing? Shoji didn't know, but in the depths of his heart, he hoped and prayed that when the two of them came down those stairs, they'd be friends again. Because after everything he'd done, following Naruto, searching for Shikamaru, talking to Asuma Sarutobi, confronting Naruto at school, and finally bringing the two of them here. After all of that, that was the only thing he wanted. Shikamaru knew this was coming. He couldn't escape the events of the last week, not if he wanted to keep being friends with Shoji and Hinata. He wasn't even angry anymore, just tired. Tired of the endless arguments and having to justify himself all the time. If it wasn't Naruto, it was his parents. If it wasn't them, it was Hinata, Shoji's mother, his teachers. Practically everyone at this point. He was tired of being ignored because he was lazy. Nothing he said ever meant anything because everyone assumed he didn't care about anything, but that wasn't true. He just didn't care about being a shinobi. No one ever seemed to want to ask what he wanted. It was all about what they wanted him to do. Despite that, he regretted how things turned out. He didn't mean to say the things he said. He was just so angry at Naruto that all the months of his nagging and disregard for Shikamaru's own opinions came rushing back, and he hurt Naruto the only way he knew how. Looking across the room, he saw real anger in Naruto's eyes. Anger that he was responsible for. His usually kind face twisted into a frown. He took a breath and stood up, sitting down on the floor and leaning against the bed frame. Now, they were level, and Shikamaru stared directly into his eyes. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. Something about the intensity of his gaze captured his own. You were wrong to insult me, said Naruto. Why? I offered help and tried to cheer you up after the loss. Shikamaru glared. This isn't about the fight or anything else that happened after it. This thing between you and me started way before that. You just refused to see it any other way. Oh yeah? Naruto scoffed. So, what then? It's fine you behave like a dumbass just because we value different things? No. He clenched his jaw and forced his voice down to a talking level. No, I'm saying that you don't seem to care about what anyone thinks. That's rich coming from you. Naruto laughed and he felt the anger starting to boil. You don't listen to anyone and you don't give a shit about your future. There's a whole world out there with people stronger than the Hokage, never mind you and me. Your life will be in danger just by wearing our village's symbol on your forehead. That doesn't matter? I never said it didn't matter. He was standing now, his shoulders heaving. His face felt hot and his voice cracked, but he ignored it. It wasn't me who assumed I didn't care, it was you, Naruto, all of you. The room was so quiet they could hear the birds outside Choji's window. All the anger fell from Naruto's face and he sighed, walking over to the window and closing it. He brought Choji's chair with him and set it in front of the bed. It's obvious this isn't working, so let's do it differently. Naruto sat down on the mattress and gestured at the chair. Take a seat. Shikamaru shuffled forward, unsure of what he was planning, but sat down anyway. I'm sick of the two of us being stupid about this, said Naruto. You're right, I don't get you. The way you think makes absolutely no sense to me. I think you can be really frustrating. And you're not? Even then, everyone's frustrating sometimes. Hinata can be way too stuck up and stubborn to the point that she doesn't listen. Choji's sometimes too afraid to say things that need to be said, but I guess he's working on that. Me? I can get carried away with training because I'm afraid. Of what? He asked. Naruto shook his head. I'll tell you later. Again, I don't get your way of thinking. I never gave it a chance before, but if we're going to get anywhere, I need to understand why you are the way you are. I think you've heard a lot about what I think, but what do you think and why? What? Shikamaru leaned back in his chair, scooting away from him. For a moment, his brain went completely blank, and why wouldn't it? No one had ever tried to actually understand beyond what was polite. They always gave up once it got to that point, and Naruto might have been the first person to ask why he thought and acted this way. I guess I'd like to start with a question. Shikamaru stopped looking away from him. What do you want to achieve by being a shinobi? He scratched his chin. To put it simply, I want the power to live a life free from fear. Exactly. Hinata and Choji also want something from being a shinobi, but I don't. Everything I want starts and ends with living an average life. He laughed quietly. It must sound crazy to you. I'm the son of one of the village's biggest clans and all I want is to live an ordinary life. No, not strange. Naruto hummed. But you know you won't be able to, right? Just by being the only child of your parents, your major life decisions are all picked out for you. You're in the academy, you'll be a shinobi, and you'll succeed your father, maybe on both counts. Shikamaru nodded. I know, alright, but my bottom line is that I don't want to. All I want is a family, a nice house, and enough to enjoy myself. I can't control how I was born, and I know I have duties to my parents in the village. I've never said I won't fulfill them, but why does nothing I want matter? Naruto frowned and clutched his chin. Let me think for a minute. If I'm going to be honest, I didn't expect you to say anything except, works hard, don't want to do it. I prefer doing nothing. Glad to disappoint, Shikamaru replied, snorting softly. Naruto took a few minutes, humming to himself and frequently looking over at him in mild surprise, as if he was surprised Shikamaru was still there. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you're basically telling me you don't want to live a difficult life. As in, you want a regular family, regular home, decent position so that you don't have to worry about anything in life, right? Yeah. You're also aware that your environment has made a few of those things impossible. Shikamaru nodded. I am. But even then, you want to do, not the bare minimum, but just enough. Is that a bad thing? Do you want me to be honest? Asked Naruto, his eyes going from curious to grim. Yeah? He sat up and eased on the apprehensive frown. Do you have a problem with anything I've said or something? Not exactly. Then what's wrong? Remember when I said I work hard out of fear? It's because the village has a lot of enemies. There's Orochimaru of the Sannin, and sure he's been pretty quiet for years now, but what about that lunatic Itachi Uchiha? Naruto's smile was brittle. I'm ignoring so many other things as well. There's the stone, who hates our guts, and the sand. The sand? Aren't they our allies? You passed economics with flying colors and the answer to your question's right in front of you. Hidden villages are sustained by trade and missions. The sand trades pretty frequently with the land of fire, but they're falling on hard times because it's quickly becoming their primary source of income. How are most missions funded? Shikamaru frowned. Well, you've got actual paying clients like regular people, nobles, and businesses, but they make up a minority of the actual mission requests and are mostly low-rank ones assigned to genin and sometimes chunin. Missions above C rank are paid for by the daimyo, but a village's cage decides what the actual mission is. Cage-decided missions make up the bulk of a hidden village's mission income. Naruto nodded. The answer to my question wasn't a massive section in the school textbook, so if you don't know, I'll just tell you. No, I remember reading about it. He pinched the bridge of his nose to help gather his thoughts. When the Sand lost the Great War and Lord Third forced them into an alliance with us, the Wind Daimyo requested us for a lot of high-rank missions, not the Sand. And there's your answer. His stomach dropped. Oh, he did it to strengthen the alliance between us, but that's bullshit. He just doesn't trust the strength of his country's shinobi because they lost the war. Naruto spread his hands and shrugged. So where does that land our alliance with the Sand? I bet it's people, the shinobi in particular, blame us for their poverty. Why wouldn't they? It's a lot easier than committing treason. They wouldn't go to war with us, would they? That'd be the same as inviting the stone to try something and boom, world war. I don't know, man. He leaned back on his palms. I don't know, and that's why I'm afraid. The world is at peace right now, but it's not a stable peace. It was always one enforced using the fourth Hokage as a deterrent, and when he died, things started going downhill. A world like that, it won't let you take things easy. Are you sure you want to roll the dice on your dreams like that? On your family or your potential wife and kids? Shikamaru looked away, unable to hold the genuine concern in Naruto's eyes. It was easy to gripe and groan about the burden of expectations, but sometimes, when was alone at night, his mind asked questions his tongue was terrified to utter. Questions he could ignore by pretending they didn't exist. He hadn't spoken them, and no one had asked him to answer. Now, his friend sat there, not only asking those questions but placing them beside actual reality. His problems, the things he felt angry over, what chance did they stand? And yet, he didn't feel an ounce of the burning anger coursing through his veins when his mother and father brought up their arguments about reality and consequences. Naruto leaned forward and intertwined his fingers in front of his face. I get where you're coming from, at least, I think I do. It wasn't really about the hard work more than what it meant you had to do. And honestly, your dreams are great. Thanks, I guess. Just don't forget that you exist in a world with all of us, people. Some of them won't hesitate to kill you and everyone you care about. They're not a distant threat millions of miles away. There might be people in our village who are willing to do horrible things to us. You never know. Shikamaru looked down, strangely accepting of the idea. I guess I want to be free to choose, to see whether or not what I want will work out. I hear you. We all want different things out of life. He grimaced and looked away for a second. Listen, I know I can get pretty forceful about things. It might have come out of concern and care, but I ignored your feelings and thoughts. I'm sorry for that. There it was, the consideration nobody had thought about giving him before today. That was why he wasn't angry. For what it's worth, Shikamaru sighed. I'm sorry for being a dick. I shouldn't have shot you down like that, not by aiming at something I knew was a sore spot. Your timing was atrocious, but that ain't an excuse for me to lose my cool over offered help instead. Naruto smiled and nodded in satisfaction. He stopped and fixed his shirt, going over to the door and opening it wide. Great, I'm glad we're on the same page. He twisted his neck. So, we're cool now, right? I might get annoyed at your laziness now and again. Naruto chuckled. That's just who you are. I know why you're like that now, and I've mostly accepted it. But yeah, we're cool. He closed the door behind him. Shikamaru didn't know what to think for a moment. To have his entire worldview disassembled and restructured to him was an experience. By the end of it, he was slightly more aware of where he sat in the world. Where his dreams sat in the world. His father said it best. People made their own choices in life and whatever came from those choices, the burden of consequences, good and bad, wasn't just a choice, it was a responsibility. His lack of ambition, no matter what anyone said, remained. But now, reality sat at the edge of his mind. He wasn't sure how, but maybe one day, he'd find a balance. One where his dreams and the world sat equally on a scale. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto insert, Chapter 2.13-23. Published by Scribble Hub. Chapter 2.13-23. There was one disguise, one transformation, that I could use flawlessly. It was so flawless that I reckoned only true masters of disguise could recognize it. Over the years, the disguise ended up becoming my go-to, changing a little from its original form to fit the new circumstance I'd found myself in a decade ago now. I even had a dedicated outfit for it, a black long sleeve and dark blue cargo pants. The shoes were simple trainers, flat-footed, and had no particular logo, though I did find myself missing the old Nike tick sometimes. August was rolling in and the overwhelmingly blistering heat had eased off these last few weeks. I looked out of my bedroom window, sticking a hand out of it to decide whether I needed to put something over my shirt. I guess not, I muttered, walking over to the tall mirror attached to the left door of my wardrobe. The person looking back at me was noticeably taller than I normally was, standing at 5'11". My skin was slightly tanned, the kind of tan you get from long years out in the sun, and I was sporting black hair and brown eyes, though my hairstyle was the same as my real form. Initially, I decided to grow my hair out to screw with the villagers. Have them make the connection between me and my father and then see that the idea I could look anything like the fourth, the man whose death I was supposedly responsible for. At some point though, I decided to tie the back of my admittedly wild hair into a small ponytail. Mostly because I hated how it felt when I got sweaty and it stuck to my nape, but I couldn't cut it because I enjoyed annoying the villagers too much. And so a compromise had to be made. The hairstyle was a part of me now, and when I thought of myself, it was the first thing that came to mind. My whiskers were completely gone and on the whole, my face looked a little boyish. Precise age details were finicky to get down and I didn't trust my skills enough to age myself up too much, so I was hovering in that weird range between 16 and 20. Uruka-sensei had finally seen fit to teach us the transformation jutsu's voice modulation component a few months ago, and I'd been using the transformation ever since to do everything. And I do mean everything because if nothing else, it was a useful exercise in chakra manipulation. Good to see you again, old chap, I snorted, speaking English for the first time in a while. Learning, or was it relearning? To speak English was a lot harder than I thought, and getting down my once native southern accent was even more difficult. I'd learned Japanese first, so I had to spend months teaching my tongue to speak differently than it had been doing for years. The writing and reading were the easy parts. I decided to do those the minute I could but put speaking off because I thought I'd be able to slip back into it instantly. To this day, I wondered what the hell I was thinking. Moments like those reminded me I was still a child in both body and mind. My life experience might have been the grand sum of 22, but the brain was as much a part of the body as anything else, and said body was 10 years old. That said, my disguise wasn't a one-to-one version of who I was before my rebirth. I'd been Naruto for over a decade and felt as much like him as I did myself, and it showed in the disguise. Everything above the face was still the same shape, though my nose, jaw, and lips were all from my past life. Ultimately, it was a useless thing, but I wanted to make my disguise the perfect blend of who I was and who I used to be. Cracking a grin, I left my apartment and pulled out my palm-sized notepad where I'd scribbled down a list of things I needed to buy for next week. I had my training with Asuma in 4 hours. His change to Sunday was unexpected, but thankfully my shift at Ichiraku's was a morning one on Sundays, leaving me with the rest of the day free. All in all, shopping would take around an hour and a half, maybe 2, giving me time to heat my lunch and another 2 hours to digest it before training. My shopping list would take me from the southern side of the village to the east, to the Merchant's Gate, where all the merchants and businesses entered. It was also where the high-end shops and restaurants were, like Yakiniku-Q and a few others. Like the famous chain supermarket brand in all the main hidden villages, Ninja Mart. There were 2 other gates, the north and the west. The former was for visitors, anywhere from foreign ninja to people coming on day trips from neighboring towns. All of them passed through the northern gate. It was the second biggest gate out of the three, the first being the merchant's one on the east side. The western gate was shinobi only. It was frequented by people going and returning from missions and was right next to one of the TNI offices dedicated to receiving prisoners. When I became a genin, it was the gate I'd be using to go on missions with my team, and it was active 24/7. Returning my attention to the shopping list, I decided I'd work by proximity, so whatever neat order I was thinking when I wrote this went right out of the window. Luckily, the park Asuma and I trained at was also on the east side of the village, which meant I could splurge on some fancy food. That alone was a mood booster, accelerating my stroll to a brisk walk as I made a stop at my first shop. Mr. Totsugi, it's been too long. I smiled at the owner of the second-hand clothes store. It was mostly a family-run business where the community dumped unwanted clothes. The salvageable ones were repaired and everything else was dumped, meaning the quality was a steal, especially considering the price. How are you, Mr. Sanada? I said, walking over and shaking the man's hand. I couldn't help it. Being in my body, using my first voice, or whatever I could remember of it, made me want to try and become the person I used to be in the little ways. Of course, that garnered weird looks from my unfortunate victims, but given that they hated the real me, I didn't care much. The usuals had long since accepted it now and were actively reciprocating my weird and supposedly foreign habits. Maybe they were carrying them over to their own lives, spreading handshake greetings everywhere. I chuckled at the mental image. How's your son? Asked the shopkeeper, his old face stretching into a smile. I had no idea what I was doing when I was your age. My daughter ran circles around me and without my wife, she would have had me wrapped around my finger before she turned 10. I don't know how you do it alone. I never had children in my last life, died too young, but people had children younger here. It wasn't rare to see 20-year-old married couples with toddlers, especially since the village had been incentivizing people to do so through various welfare policies. With lots of patience, sir, lots of patience. We shared a hearty laugh. It helps that he was already 5 when I adopted him. I don't suppose you have any everyday wear for 10-year-old boys, do you? Don't worry if they're out of style. He doesn't care much about fashion. I don't even mind if they're a bit oversized because he'll grow into them. Mr. Sanada pointed a finger at me and bounced on his feet. In that case, I have just the thing for you. How many outfits will you need? I rubbed my chin. Shorts are out since the weather will only get colder. Let me get 3 short sleeves, 1 long sleeve. He has enough of those already, and 2 pairs of trousers. I have some jeans around 140 centimeters. Perfect. 2 jeans then. Mr. Sanada slid his glasses up his face. And the other 2? You know what? I smiled. Surprise me. I walked out of the building with a couple more items than I'd intended to buy but was satisfied with all of them. Mr. Sanada had even thrown in a free belt when I mentioned my supposed son's trouser size was 135 centimeters instead of 140 centimeters. It was kind of sad, really. No matter how many times I did it, I'd never stop feeling the jarring shock of not being Naruto Uzumaki. Mr. Sanada, who I'd learned was an insanely kind man, had run me out of his shop a few years ago. Did that still make him a good man? Hell, the way people looked at me was different, let alone how they treated me. It was the same with all the other shops. Hideo the butcher tossed in an extra chicken breast because he knew I had a growing son. Instead of refusing to serve me, the carpenter's family brought me a cup of tea while I sorted out an order after realizing the table and chairs my place had come with had run their course. None of this was new to me, having been going about in this disguise for a few months now, but it was always sobering to see. An hour later, I was down to the last place on my list, mildly hungry and eager to have lunch. I looked up at the massive red sign. A shuriken separated the 2 words, acting as the shop's logo. Ninja Mart, here I come. Adjusting my grip over the shop trolley, I slotted in a coin and steered it away. You excuse me, sir? A relatively young woman stood behind me. The first thing I noticed were her clothes, a rough patchwork kimono and wooden sandals. She was carrying a backpack, but it only had one shoulder strap that was digging painfully into her shoulder. She had straight, dark brown hair and almond-shaped eyes. Her skin was incredibly pale, so much so that, if I looked carefully, I could see her greenish veins standing out against her skin. Either she was a really youthful-looking adult or a teenager, standing at around 5 feet tall. I was a little surprised because people from the poorer northwest of the village didn't come to the Leaf's east side often. Can I help you? I gave her a disarming smile, but it only seemed to make her more nervous. Why do you call me, sir? I'm not that old, am I? Oh, no. She waved her hands in front of her face. I didn't mean to offend you. I chuckled. It's my fault. I went for a joke that didn't land. What can I help you with? I'm Rukia, just Rukia. I have no last name, you see. She bowed proper and deep, her long hair hovering over the ground. I arrived just today from a small village. My father sent me here to restock. Rukia pulled out a withered scrap of paper from her kimono. The tools we use are beyond repair. Do you know where this shop is? I leaned over her shoulder, staring at the hastily scribbled name of a smithy on the west side of the village. I knew of it because it was where I bought and maintained all of my weapons. Asuma recommended it to me after our training one day because the wares were cheaper for their quality compared to some other shops. They weren't limited to just shinobi weapons and did all-purpose tools like axes, hoes, sickles, and whatnot. I do, I replied, but you're going to have to wait for me to do my shopping. I'm Totsugi, by the way, no last name either. It's nice to meet you, Totsugi. She bowed again, and that's fine. I'll accompany you if needed. I raised an eyebrow. You sure? Just wait out here. Since you agreed to help me, it's only fair I help you as well. Seeing that I wouldn't be able to convince her to stay, I let her come with me. To my surprise, she could read, which wasn't a given for people who lived in the village's poorer areas. School cost money here unless your child entered the ninja academy. I suppose I was being too judgmental. Being poor didn't instantly eliminate someone's literacy chances. Because of Rukia, we were in and out in no time. She immediately sussed out aisles with just a glance and found the items I needed faster than me, and yet, since she was from a small village, she probably hadn't ever stepped foot in a ninja mart before. Once I paid for my groceries, I shrugged off the mostly empty backpack I'd been carrying around and started filling it up. Right, I grunted and slung the bag across my back. I don't know about you, but I'm starving. You were a huge help today, so how about I treat you to your first taste of Leaf Village cuisine? Rukia frowned up at me with her lips slightly downturned like she couldn't quite make up her mind. Are you sure? I am the one offering. Besides, I'm starving and I've only been running errands for a few hours. You've probably been out and about longer than I have. Aren't you hungry? That's very kind of you, but I think I'm all right. She was cut off by a low gurgle, flushing down to her neck. I raised my eyebrow and she looked away. Thank you, Totsugi. Some food would be nice. And so that's how I ended up trying yakiniku Q for the first time. It was heavy on the wallet, but Lord Third stipend saved the day. The old man probably wouldn't like me blowing a decent amount on fine dining, but Mr. Tucci would make up the loss at the end of the month. If things got bad, which I didn't think they would, I'd just eat Ichiraku ramen all the time. It wasn't exactly healthy, but I wasn't going to run out of food options anytime soon. I popped a beef slice into my mouth, smiling at how it numbed my tongue. This is worth the price. How much did you pay for all this? Asked Rukia while she fried the cuts. Every time I tried to help out, she'd slap my hand away and glare, so I simply gave up after the third go. I stuck another slice into my mouth, skillfully dodging the question for a little while. Rukia flipped over the slices and frowned. Totsugi. 9,500 ryo. Her frown deepened, making me wince. Before you say anything, I intended to eat something expensive today regardless. I'm not in the east side often, so I thought I'd splurge a little. Even then, did you have to invite me? Rukia huffed. It was kind, but I don't want you to suffer later on because of me. I won't suffer. I picked up the tongs she discarded a few minutes ago and placed new cuts on the grill. I get paid in a few weeks and have quite a bit of money saved up. If I didn't, I wouldn't have offered, so no more complaining. She looked like she wanted to contest that but sighed in the end. If you say so. I learned a bit more about Rukia as the meal went on. She was adopted by a widower who found her abandoned at the site of a robbery gone wrong. A bandit crew had slaughtered her parents, who were traveling through the land of fire as merchants. Her adoptive father found her hours later, and seeing the tragedy she was born into, took her in to give her a better life. I shared a little bit about myself so that it wasn't one-sided. After she revealed something as heavy as that, I felt like I'd cried a little. You have a son? Rukia's eyebrows disappeared into her hairline. But, aren't you my age? How old are you? 15. I laughed, using the little time I had to figure out a believable explanation. I'm 19 and yes, I have a son, legally speaking, anyway. I ended up adopting him when I was 15. I see. We also look nothing alike. He's got blonde hair and blue eyes. I wonder how you explain your relationship to people, she smiled. What's his name, if you don't mind me asking? It's Naruto. She laughed. As in the ramen topping? As in Maelstrom. I shook my head at her laughter, though he is a huge ramen fan. We kept ordering beef until we'd had our fill. Yakiniku-Q charged a flat amount and let you eat as much as you wanted, within reason anyway. I had to explain that to my new friend because she set down her chopsticks after 4 beef slices and told me she was full. Even then, I needed the expertise of one of the waiters to set her mind at peace before she could really cut loose. For someone so small, she ate a disturbing amount and I found myself thanking God it was an all-you-can-eat place. You know, said Rukia, as we walked out of the restaurant, you're a good person, Totsugi. Thank you, but I'm selfish too. Buying you a meal was convenient for me as well, I explained. If I didn't, I'd have to take you all the way to the blacksmith's only to cross the village after that to eat my lunch. And now you've ruined the moment. I snorted and continued to walk. We could have taken a carriage, but I'd eaten a little too much beef. If I took a carriage, I'd either end up in a food coma, or throw it all up later. Asuma was a fan of making me do egregiously active warm-ups, so it was a real possibility. When we arrived, I was significantly less full. There's your blacksmith, I said, pointing at a building on the high street. Your dad has a good eye for quality. They're pretty cheap with prices, so you'll be getting your money's worth. Thank you, Totsugi. Rukia bowed and walked away. I raised a hand in farewell when she turned around before making my way back home. I only had an hour left before my training, so I had to hurry. Making sure there was no one in sight, I dived into an alleyway and climbed to the roof, taking off. It was touch and go for a few moments and I had to force down the premium beef a couple of times, but I got home with over half an hour to spare. After a quick shower and a change of clothes, I was off, no longer under disguise, and raced across the rooftops back to the east side of the village. I looked at my wrist and frowned. Damn, I might end up being late. After making sure there was no one nearby, I mixed my chakra and made a few hand signs, racing myself. The world wrenched behind me and my eyes flooded with so many tears that I couldn't see anything. It slammed to a stop, lurching me forward. My arms flailed about in search of any objects to stop myself from falling, grasping only air, so I tipped forward until I caught myself using my palms. I twisted my neck to look back and grinned, and why wouldn't I? With one jutsu, I cleared roughly 15 meters in a single step. That said, the body flicker jutsu wasn't as impressive as I thought it would be. Don't get me wrong, it was definitely a speed enhancement, but in my opinion, it wasn't a good one. The jutsu was static. It didn't let you change directions while moving, so if an opponent caught onto where you were going, it was curtains because of the jutsu's second flaw. Well, it wasn't a universal flaw, and could be fixed relatively easily, I just couldn't do it yet. The body flicker jutsu was a standard D-rank speed technique, one so fast that the human eye couldn't keep up with it, and that included its user. For people lucky enough to have dojutsu or weird bloodline limits, this was a non-issue since their sight was better in general. For the rest of us, the prerequisite to overcoming the second flaw was enhancing your sight using chakra, and in the middle of battle, this wasn't exactly ideal. It was listed as an escape technique, so its focus was never on battle in the first place. If there was a way to overcome the issue by slightly lowering its speed, I didn't know how to do that either. The body flicker jutsu was one we were going to learn closer to the end of the year, but Iruka-sensei taught it to Sasuke and me a little earlier because we were further ahead than he thought. To be fair, all of my conclusions had come from about a week's worth of experimentation, so maybe there was something I hadn't figured out yet. I arrived at the clearing just barely on time. Asuma was wandering about as usual and finished smoking before he came over. You're going to have to teach me that trick sometime, I said. He grinned. You sure you want to start smoking, kid? I doubt you have any hair on your chest. What? No, I made a face, but manipulating wind chakra like that seems useful. You blew away all the cigarette smoke on and around you without a single hand sign. Huh, be clearer next time. Asuma ruffled my hair. He knew I hated it, but that was exactly why he did it in the first place. Sure, I'll teach you, but only when you're good enough for it. Right now, all you know is one D-rank wind release jutsu and a few things you learned in the academy, and you haven't even learned everything they've got to offer. Have some patience. I swatted him away and fixed my hair. So, what are we doing today? His easygoing smile turned slightly bloodthirsty, and I felt the usual pressure of his killing intent on my skin. Instead of shutting down like I did the first time we fought, I grinned and sprung back from him, pulling out both my kunai and brandishing them. Asuma drew his trench knives and did the same, our stances mirroring one another's. These last few months with the man had let me pick up a lot of useful skills, and his bukajutsu style was one of them. It was just better than the basic weapon forms I learned in the academy, which made sense. As childish as he could be, the guy was an A- rank jonin for a reason. He tilted his head sideways. For a kid who hasn't even seen first blood, you've got a decent presence. I can't call it killing intent because, well, you haven't killed anyone. The yet went unsaid between us. At this level, you'll at least throw off the other brats you're sparring with. I shrugged. There's no reason to use it against them. Oh, really? Asuma grinned. So, you beat the Uchiha kid and think you're hot shit, do you? Don't think you'll be able to win the same way. Not when he knows you can use wind release jutsu. He stared pointedly at me as the rest of his intended meaning went unsaid. Sasuke was adept at fire release ninjutsu, and fire countered wind. However, it wasn't anything I wasn't aware of. I knew I needed to up my skills rather than get my hands on new jutsu. Otherwise, Sasuke would beat me pretty handily in our next encounter. He didn't need to hear me say it, though. Are we gonna talk, or are we gonna fight? I blinked and Asuma was gone. Kids these days, suit yourself, he sighed, the hot air from the exhale tickling my right ear. I pivoted so fast the world was a blur, going for a slashing hook aimed at his belly. He skipped out of the way, but I chased after him, stabbing and slashing with increasing ferocity. He blocked each attack easily, all with the usual smile on his face. I planted my feet, sliding the rings of each kunai around the index and ring fingers of my right hand, freeing my left to gather chakra via the confrontation seal. The majority of it went right down, allowing me to spring ahead and quickly close the gap before it even had the chance to widen. I stretched out my left hand while spreading whatever molded chakra I had left across my palm. It made contact with Asuma's flak jacket and the momentum from my sprint and Asuma's combined, dragging me along with him. He looked down and I twirled my fingers, spinning both kunai around until I had them layered atop each other and pointed straight at him. I clenched tightly and lunged, dragging him towards me at the same time. Asuma grinned, breaking the link between us and making one hand seal. How about, no. The next thing I knew, something had slammed into me, and it slammed into me hard, ripping both kunai out of my hands. It was like I'd been thrown into a tumble dryer. I felt myself crash through several branches, twigs nicked every inch of exposed skin, and I took several mouthfuls of leaves. I spat them out and cracked my eyes open, seeing the world hurtling away. In no time, I burst out of the canopy and, as I started to slow down, looked around the clearing. For a moment, everything stopped, and I was weightless, and then gravity kicked in to drag me right back down to reality. My eyes darted about and I pulled out another two kunai aiming my descent at a particularly big tree. I plunged the blades into the bark, but the whiplash was so bad I almost lost my grip. It didn't hurt, though. After years of training, most parts of my hands were rough and calloused. The worst I felt was an uncomfortable tugging in my shoulders. Readjusting, I stretched them about before yanking one out of the tree and sending it straight down to Asuma. He caught it easily and looked up, his voice oozing betrayal. Hey, what was that for? You're asking me that after blasting me away. He folded his arms and squinted, nodding several times. Yep, as expected, you're throwing a temper tantrum over it. Typical. I snorted, returning my focus to the only kunai I had left. While I was slightly annoyed that he'd done all that, there was more to my behavior than childishness or irritation. I needed to buy myself some time, and buy it I did. The world shifted as I let go of the kunai, standing on my feet. I bent over, pulled it out of the tree, and walked to the ground. Here, Asuma tossed me the kunai and sprung away, on guard. Let's go again. I caught it, taking up the same stance, and nodded. This time, he was the one going on the offensive. His attacks were twofold, punches using his trench knives knuckle-duster-like ridges and swinging cuts with the weapon's edge. He threw in weird mix-ups every so often, like uppercuts that turned into sideways aiming stabs, but so long as I stayed calm, I could react accordingly. Switching my lead hand into a forward grip, I exploited the gaps between his attacks to slip past his guard and stab him. I leaned forward, driving the point forward. Asuma leaned to the side and brought his elbow over the kunai, trapping my wrist between his torso and arm. I had maybe a few seconds before he'd win, so I let go of the kunai, relaxing my wrist enough that I could wriggle free, and immediately jumped out of range. Asuma raised his guard with a smirk. Okay then, how are you going to deal with this? Chakra danced across his blades, blue energy trailing their length and width. They buzzed to life, lengthening into two serrated chakra swords. He held them vertically in a different stance, one I'd seen only once before. Last time, you dislocated your shoulder. Well, that's not happening today. He snorted. We'll see about that. After flying through my hand seals, I dragged in a deep lungful and jumped into the air. Wind release. Breakthrough was the weaker, D-rank cousin of wind release. Great breakthrough, AC rank wind jutsu. It required less hand signs, less chakra control, and less chakra. Unfortunately, that meant it also had less power, but I could always overload its activation requirement to make up for that loss. Overloading jutsu had a limit though. Too much and it would self-destruct, making it more likely to blow up in your face than harm your opponent. So to be safe, I overloaded it within reason, even if part of me wanted to see how far I could push it. Asuma could definitely take it, but it was an overall stupid thing to do when I could just experiment with him later. I opened my mouth and aimed, releasing a violent gust. Asuma sliced upwards, cutting right through my jutsu with a wind blade so powerful I could make out its shape. I twisted in midair and fell into a crouch in the grass, immediately turning around to watch the wind blade cut through the top half of two trees, sending them crashing to the ground. I looked back with my jaw hanging open in shock. Are you trying to kill me? Asuma blinked, as if he only realized what he'd done, and sheathed his knives immediately. I got a bit too fired up. My bad. I accidentally shish kebabbed you, but my bad. What's shish kebab? I swallowed my heart back down and looked around for my kunai from earlier. Goddamn, you're a lunatic, Asuma. In your defense, you did a lot better than when I last used my chakra sabers. I fixed him with a withering stare. Right, he coughed. Seriously, well done. Thanks, I replied, calming down as the adrenaline started to fade. What now? Asuma sighed. Now, I make an announcement. Our training's going to go on a brief hiatus. I sprung to my feet. What, why? One question at a time, please. I took a breath. Okay, why are we stopping? Because I've finally got a mission. Really? I grinned. That's amazing. You've been wanting to get on one for months now, right? Yeah, I was digging into my savings to get by. He muttered something under his breath that I didn't catch. I can't tell you much about it, but it's long-term. The estimated mission period is 2 months, but it could take longer. That's basically all of the summer. I spluttered. What am I meant to do for that long? I thought you were going to teach me more winjutsu. Asuma sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. Didn't I tell you that you'll need more than ninjutsu to beat little Uchiha? Forget Sasuke. I need to diversify my skill set. Right now, everything I have is offensive. Breakthrough, enhanced blows, and your bukajutsu. I need something different to at least make me harder to catch. I was hoping you'd say that. The exasperation melted off his face, replaced by a bright grin as he pulled out a small scroll from his flak jacket. I reached out to take it but he pulled back. Not yet. I furrowed my brow. Is there some kind of challenge I've got to complete first? Nothing like that. He tucked the scroll back into the jacket and turned around. We've got to do something first. Come on. Without waiting for my answer, Asuma jumped into the canopy, giving me little choice but to follow. He led me deeper into the park in silence, not uttering a single joke the entire way. That's how I knew something was wrong, but I followed him without question. He'd earned that much trust and more. We stopped tree hopping after a short while. It was clear we were well out of park territory a good 10 minutes ago. Thick, overgrown bushes knotted and intertwined across the tree trunks below, and the canopy grew progressively thicker as we continued until the leaves completely blotted out the sky above. But the forest was cast in a light glow as the sun shone through the countless leaves encircling us. Asuma dropped to the ground abruptly and again, I followed, staying within a meter of him. My ears caught the faint tinkling of a river, the sound only becoming clearer as we traveled. I exited the forest and squeezed my eyes shut at the change in brightness. Okay, we're here, said Asuma and, after a moment, followed with, oh. Do you need a moment? I wiped my eyes and blinked rapidly. No, I'm good. Why are we here? See for yourself. I looked at the barbed fence stretching across as far as I could see. Countless wooden signposts adorned it in a neat line and they all said the same thing. Fishing permit required, no trespassing. If you were caught, you could be fined a minimum of 20,000 ryo. Wait. I looked back at Asuma. We're going fishing? He gave me a double thumbs up. I guess I could eat, I muttered to myself. Do you have a permit, then? Nope, mine expired years ago and they're a hassle to get your hands on, so we're going to jump the fence. I raised an eyebrow. That's illegal. So, he shrugged. Just don't get caught. And before you give me a speech about the law and social order or something, it's fucking fish, kid. We'll grab a few, cook them, and then be on our way, okay? Hey, I wasn't going to give you a speech on social order. Asuma stared at me dispassionately. Yeah, somehow, I don't believe you. I smirked. I was going to give you a speech on how you should know better. You're the son of the esteemed Hokage, for crying out loud. Have some shame. Don't you start, Asuma groaned, clearing the fence in one leap. And get over here. I did and, after finding a calmer part of the river, we spent an hour wading about, barehanded, taking off everything except our trousers, which we rolled up to our knees. Fishing as a chakra user was surprisingly fun. All we needed to was guide chakra to our palms and then overload it, blasting the water and sending the fish sky high. So, why did it take an hour then? Because we made a game out of seeing if we could catch the fish as they fell back down. I learned very quickly that fish were slippery little bastards, so I figured out how to catch them before Asuma did, and the answer was chakra adhesion. I'd caught 3 fish in a row when he started to realize I'd figured something out. Hey, he looked back, wet from head to toe, and frowned. How'd you catch them? I looked back at my row of prone Pisces with a satisfied smirk and then directed it back to him. Not telling. You're the Jonin, aren't you? Go figure it out. And just to be annoying, I blasted a surge of water, drenching him from head to toe. He tumbled into the river, and when he managed to get up, I doubled over. What the hell? I laughed. You look like a drowned raw. I swallowed a mouthful of river water and then some, huffing and puffing as I trudged onto the pebbled bank. Okay, I nodded once, locking eyes with Asuma. If that's how you want to play it, I'm game. The ensuing water fight went on for 20 minutes until I looked back to see that all my fish were gone. Asuma. He stopped mid-palm thrust. Look at the fish. I pointed back at the bank. We lost them. The manic grin slowly faded from his face. I really think you should give me your secret fishing technique now, kid. Given that I didn't have my fish anymore, I did. Another hour later, we were dry and in clothes again, sitting on the bank eating roasted fish on skewers and watching the sunset. The sky was a deep crimson and long orange clouds dragged along towards the horizon. Unseasoned fish aside, this was nice, I said. Thanks for bringing me here. Asuma grinned across from me. I thought it'd be a fun farewell. We fight, we fish, and then we eat. I'm glad it was. I raised a finger. Bring some paprika next time or something. I'll take anything over unseasoned fish. He rolled his eyes, peering into the crackling flames of the fire we were using to cook the fish. I was about to pull out another skewer, but the way Asuma called my name made me pause. What? I frowned. He took a breath. It's time we talk about the elephant in the room, your friend's situation. Oh, I smiled. Don't worry, it's solved now. We talked and everything's good between us. Even then, I still think we should talk. He looked serious about this, so I adjusted my position and nodded. Okay, let's talk. Your two friends, Choji and Hinata, they followed you to the clearing a few weeks ago. Wait, really? I blinked. I didn't notice anyone following me, and I always use anti-tailing techniques. Goddamn dojutsu, I swear, man. Tell me about it, Asuma sighed. Anyway, when your training finished, they were going to follow you, but I told them to stay. Why? Because I wanted to know what you had done that was so bad two other kids decided to follow you around instead of enjoying their weekend. You know what they told me? He frowned. They told me about your habit of prioritizing training over the people in your life, Naruto. I winced. I know, it's not good, but... Do you, really? Asuma wasn't shouting, but his words were charged with some indescribable emotion that I couldn't just shrug off. I'd like to tell you a bit about myself, Naruto, if that's fine. I nodded and he closed his eyes, taking a deep, audible breath through his nose and adjusting himself so he was more comfortable. 4 years ago, I left the Leaf to become a guardian shinobi in charge of the Fire Daimyo's protection. I left the village behind without looking back because I couldn't stand this place. How it demanded sacrifice from everyone. Not knowing any better, I lived by my father's example and dedicated myself to the village, but after almost 10 years I needed to do something for myself. So I left. Asuma looked up from the fire, its flames still dancing in his brown eyes. And to be honest, I was the happiest I'd been in years. I went on adventures, captured all kinds of criminals, stopped the daimyo from being kidnapped, assassinated, you name it. I've done it all, but one day, I had to return. Guess what I came back to? What? A village that had moved on. He leaned back on his palms and sighed. Everyone I know and love has moved on with their lives, and it didn't take me long to realize that there was no space for me anymore. He shook his head with a wry smile. You can't have your cake and eat it too. It's not fair to expect everyone else to put their lives on hold while you do one thing or the other, making time for them only when you decide it. His words hit too close to home and the guilt and regret in his eyes were too familiar for me, so I looked away. He sighed and cleared his throat. Here, it's AC rank support jutsu, wind release, frequency disruption. I want you to have mastered it and break through by the time I get back. Jutsu above D rank come attached with theory essays that I recommend you read and try to understand. But when I went to grab the scroll, he pulled away. All I need in return is one thing. Can you do it? I can't make any promises till I know what you want. He held my gaze for a few uncomfortable. Can you do it? I'll do my best. There was a searching look in his eyes before he spoke. I need you to dedicate some time every week to the people you care about. It can be as many times a week as you're able to, but you need to do it, Naruto, do you understand? Don't let them move on or you'll regret it, trust me. Only then did he give me the scroll, and after everything Asuma had shared, it felt heavy to hold. Over the last few months, he taught me a lot of things I was grateful for, but above all else, this was the most thought-provoking lesson of all. As the only one who knew what was coming, I had to sacrifice things for the future. The question wasn't if I had to sacrifice, but what I was willing to sacrifice, like spending time with friends and family. Did more training today really mean I'd live a happy life tomorrow? The man right next to me was evidence enough to shake my belief in putting all of my time into training. And yet the future and my foreknowledge remained. They were constant reminders of the threats, and all of them were mind-bogglingly stronger than I was right now. But there was only so much that I could train each day. Was that a valid excuse to neglect everyone who cared enough about me to worry? Nothing was ever that simple. I puzzled between bites of roasted fish, looking over at Asuma every so often. He was completely out of it, a strange melancholy twisting his face, and so I continued to think over his words in silence. The flames crackled and hissed, slowly dwindling between us as the sky darkened and day turned into night. The Cycle of Hatred, a Naruto insert, Chapter 3.1, 24. Published by Scribble Hub. Chapter 3.1, 24. Yasuhiro leaned back in his chair, his lower back tensed as he eased himself into the crumbling piece of furniture. The rest of the village hall was very much the same and in dire need of repair. The roof leaked under the slightest bit of rain, but as the chief of Tenka village, he knew better than to use the community's hard-earned money to make his own life easier. Tenka village sat on the border between the land of fire and the land of iron. In a few decades, he'd watched it grow from a few small huts to a bustling village that was 200 people strong. Sadly, it was one born of necessity, as after the Great War, many found themselves fleeing various wars and evil leaders. For him, it was the countless skirmishes in his home country, the land of rain. Initially, he intended to migrate to the land of iron after plundering a set of well-forged swords from a wandering ronin. Corpses of mercenaries and shinobi alike were common back then, but finding one untouched was sheer luck on his part. Unfortunately, there was no secret manual of the man's martial arts. Still, the swords had sentimental value and were the single most prized possession he had. The only prized possession he had, and one he would pass on to his grandson in due time. If only the little brat learns to calm down, he huffed, exhaling thin smoke clouds as he set his age pipe on the table. The village hall's dilapidated door smashed open with enough force he heard it from his office floor above. Chief. Yasuhiro bit his tongue, cursing as he flew down the stairs. What is it? He rounded to face Naomichi the blacksmith. Is it them? Naomichi nodded, which was all the confirmation he needed to fly through the door with the younger man on his tail. Yasuhiro kept his head on a swivel, taking a head count of any villagers they passed and instructing them to lock themselves in their homes. Fucking rogues, Naomichi grunted. Who do they think they are, huh? Set an up shop outside our village and then treating us like fucking peasants. He stamped to his foot and spat on the well-trod earth below them. Yasuhiro didn't voice his thoughts, but the same frustration broiled within him. His swords pressed themselves against his left hip and he gripped the katana's worn handle to calm himself down. 2 years, that was how long the band of rogues had terrorized Tenka village. They arrived during the dead of night, kicking down doors to announce their intention to settle in an abandoned tower nearby, and anyone of use was dragged away kicking and screaming to renovate it. Every service the village could offer was abused. The inns were occupied without pay, the village folk were used as serfs, and they consistently and regularly undermined Yasuhiro's authority. Yet, what could he do? The rogues were once shinobi and could use chakra as easily as breathing. He was an old man in possession of well-maintained but aged samurai swords, and the rest of the villagers were even worse off than he was. He and Naomichi stopped in front of the empty plate, named quite aptly for when it was built. Looking back at Naomichi, he raised a hand. Wait out here, I will handle Goro Tanimoto. Fine, replied the blacksmith, spitting again at the mention of the band's leader. Sighing, Yasuhiro opened the door with shaking hands, scanning the first 2 floors. As expected, they were filled to the brim with rogues, be they masterless samurai or villageless shinobi. Goro sat front and center, directly in front of the door. The inn's only serving girl sat quivering on his lap. She whimpered, looking ready to bolt towards him, but Goro's rumbling laugh stopped her before she could twitch in his direction. He tilted his chin up and flashed him a vicious leer. It sure is nice to see you alive and well, old man. Mr. Goro, Yasuhiro bowed slightly. Would you mind releasing the poor girl? He rolled his eyes, sending her off with a harsh slap to the rear. Off you go. The rest of the rogues jeered and whistled, some even trying to grab onto her as she crossed the floor. She threw herself into Yasuhiro's embrace, sobbing into his old kimono. There. He rubbed circles into her back, not letting the rage bleed into his voice. Go home, Yumi. I'm sorry this happened to you, but it's a burden I cannot lift off our shoulders. Go home to your husband and your son, be with them for the rest of the day. I'll help close up with Chi when we finish here. Gratitude overflowed Yumi's red-rimmed eyes. Thank you, chief. Goro barked out a laugh that his subordinates tagged onto. The tavern door swung shut, leaving Yasuhiro alone in the dining area with 20-odd rogues when there should have been at least half a dozen more. Good to see you've still got your wits about you, old man, said Goro, almost as if he'd read his mind. I've lost a few of my men since you last saw us. Yasuhiro clammed up, but the rogue shinobi continued. See, my boys and I had an unpleasant encounter with some hidden sound ninja. I'm not familiar with that village. It's a new one. I don't know who's in charge of it and I don't really care. There's a reason I don't wear a headband anymore. Living under the thumb of some decrepit old bastard never tickled my fancy. No offense to you, of course. Goro grinned and leaned forward, cupping his chin in a hand. Bad news is, I lost a few of my men, damaged or lost a good number of weapons, and worst of all, I'm starving. Yasuhiro narrowed his eyes, searching the man's face for any lies as his comrades laughed at the moronic joke. At the very least, his infamous ring broadsword was nowhere to be seen, so he seemed to be telling the truth. Well, we can do something for your hunger first, he said, throwing up a pleasant smile and bowing deeply. As for the weapons, I invite you to my office in the village hall after your meal so we can discuss the details of your repairs. The rogue ninja pointed his finger in his direction. See this? This is why we get along so well. You always know when to bow, and with me, that's all the goddamn time. Isn't that right, old man? He deepened his bow to the point that he couldn't see anything beyond his own feet. His gray hair hung over his face. Yasuhiro gritted his teeth, praying it hid the hatred contorting his face. Of course, Mr. Goro. He took a breath. I'll check the kitchen and see how the food is coming along. With your permission, of course. Goro waved him away, and tell them to bring more alcohol. 3 terrified cooks scrambled around the kitchen, finishing meals they were already cooking in bulk and pulling out leftovers from the fridge. The inns were the village's biggest source of income, and Yasuhiro made sure to invest in their future. Technology was a rare sight outside of towns, but he procured 2 home fridges a decade ago to give to the 2 inns. He pulled aside one of the workers, a sweaty, pimpled teenage boy. Where's Chi? I'm over here, Ohashi. Yasuhiro turned to her, eager to skip the byplay between them. Can you do it? She stood taller than him, not that he was tall at all, and her dismissive stare had only intensified with age. What do you take me for? Worry less about my kitchen and more about controlling the herd of deer you call a village, you wrinkly bastard. She was one of the village's founders alongside himself and a few others who had died shortly after the rogues arrived. Her casual disrespect, as much as it seemed otherwise, was a sign of their friendship and a source of amusement in the otherwise dreary village life. All right, he said with a smile. It's good to see that despicable excuse of a man hasn't dimmed your fire. The cooks flinched. She rolled her eyes. If you think he can hear us over the noise in here, you guys are better imbeciles than I've given you credit for. The pimpled boy spun around. He's a shinobi, ma'am, with magic powers. And if he heard us, he'll walk in here and paint the room with our insides. I couldn't tell you which is worse, kid. 2 years under his yoke or instant death. I'm growing tired of this song and dance. She shrugged her shoulders and turned to Yasuhiro. Get out of here, Ohashi. I've got this sorry lot covered. Yasuhiro smiled gratefully. Thank you, Chi. Goro will head to the village hall after you feed him and his. In the meantime, I'll get the stragglers off the streets and make sure there aren't any children out. You go do that. He left through the back exit, circling to the main street. The village should have been bustling with life right about now. It was just past lunchtime and people would be readying themselves to return to work. Instead, they were forced to deal with a horde of ungrateful, uncaring, inhuman bastards under the command of Goro Tanimoto. True to his word, Yasuhiro made sure to usher anyone left outside back into their houses, combing the streets as he made his way back to the village hall. The building served both as his family home and his place of work. Grandfather. Despite the circumstances, he smiled as his grandson sprinted towards him from the front door. Tsutomu, my boy, who sent you here? Myself, the 6-year-old replied with a toothy grin, though it quickly fell from his face. Grandfather, is it true? Leading him back into the house, Yasuhiro walked him across the corridor and away from the village hall proper. His living quarters were attached to the side of the building. Is what true? Tsutomu bowed his head. The jagged blades, are they back? The jagged blades, he scoffed. A fancy name won't hide what they are, son. Goro and his subordinates are little more than pathetic lowlives who oppress those that they can and cower from those they can't. But they're scary, grandfather, his grandson whimpered. What am I supposed to do? Yasuhiro kneeled and ruffled his hair. You don't have to do anything. Leave it to us adults to handle them. Tsutomu nodded reluctantly. Go, now, stay in your room until I come to find you. On his way out, he locked the door separating the village hall and his residence from the outside. It wouldn't stop Goro or any of his men from busting it down, but knowing his grandson couldn't wander into danger set his mind at ease. He took a teapot and 2 old teacups to his office as he waited for the Goro to arrive. The rogue entered the office with a lazy smirk, swiping the teapot and pouring himself a glass and, to Yasuhiro's worry, pouring him a glass as well. He took the glass but held off on drinking first for fear of offending the man. As expected, his demands were obnoxious, and more importantly, beyond the village's capabilities. Naomichi was the only blacksmith experienced with weapons and he couldn't fill an order that size, even with the help of his students. Next came the routine question of topping up the outpost's provisions. Tenka village made enough to have a small surplus, but in recent years, the jagged blades had been siphoning off the surplus they usually traded to nearby villages, turning their home into a self-sustaining one. While the rogues weren't around all the time, the irregularity of their hunts for bounties made it impossible to plan for their return, leaving Yasuhiro to improvise around Goro's personality. Chief. The front door slammed open, drawing a curious sound from the rogue ninja. Who's got the stones to disturb our meeting? He raised an eyebrow and stood up. Come, old man, let's go see. Sliding his swords off the rack, Yasuhiro slipped them through his waistband and followed the ex-shinobi down the stairs. Naomichi, what are you doing here? The blacksmith was red-faced, still bent over and heaving for breath while shaking fearfully at the sight of the rogue ninja. The empty plate, Yumi's hoo-hoo husband, he. You heard the man, said Goro, shoving Naomichi aside. To the empty plate, we go. Yasuhiro trailed behind him, fearing the worst. Yumi's husband was a good man, but he had a temper and was fiercely protective of his wife, especially since the jagged blades had come to town. Usually, his wife was there to calm him down, but today's events had crossed a line, shaking her to the core. Judging by the cheerful tune he was whistling, Goro knew that too. He threw open the tavern's door and let out a long hum before stepping aside. Meanwhile, Yasuhiro didn't need longer than a few seconds to realize what had happened. He turned, emptying his stomach into the corner of the room as the gathered shinobi jeered. Coward, he'll only make the smell worse. Get him out of here. He stumbled towards the body, tracing a hand across his young lifeless face. Keikashigi, you stupid boy. He bunched the dead man's kimono inside a fist, his eyes burning with tears. Damn, someone ran him right through, said Goro, standing over him and casting his looming shadow over both him and the body. He raised his voice. Oi, which one of you stabbed the poor bastard? A gaunt-looking man stepped forward. He sported a quickly darkening bruise on the side of his face. It was me, boss. He slugged you so you stabbed him? Goro folded his arms. Why'd he even do it? Yasuhiro rose to his feet, swaying slightly as he wiped the tears from his face. The serving girl was his wife. He looked up, trying to keep his eyes off the corpse. He came in here screaming bloody murder. The gaunt man snorted, so I told him his wife completed her services as expected and that he should be proud of her. I get why he hit you now. Goro laughed and nudged the corpse with his foot. Sorry bastard got what he deserved. See, we rule this town, right boys? The rest of the jagged blades roared, raising tankards and stamping their feet. Yasuhiro bowed his head and bit the inside of his cheek. He desperately wanted to draw his sword and kill every single scumbag in the inn, but they were shinobi. Hey, old man, Goro swung his head back. I'll be generous and let your people off the hook. This idiot's dead anyway and the situation's a pretty positive one. He gulped. It is? Sure, that cute serving girl's a widow now, ain't she? He smirked, undisguised lust smoldering in his dark eyes. Maybe I'll take her on as a concubine. Again, his subordinates broke out into jeering laughter, whistling and bellowing at the top of their lungs. But I'm not a savage. I'll give her space to mourn, go out on more raids, shower her in gifts. She got any kids? Oh, one. Boy or girl? A boy. Goro scratched at his stubble. The little shit might want revenge. Yasuhiro widened his eyes. And no, he's barely one, Mr. Guro. The mercenary's face brightened. That's perfect. I'll take in the schmuck's kid. Teach him my ways. He nodded to himself and walked to the kitchen, banging on the door. Old hag, bring more alcohol. There's a celebration to be had. He walked back, looking down at the corpse in surprise. Go deal with the body, old man. Yes, Mr. Guro. As he was too small to carry the body on his own, Yasuhiro had to get one of the cooks to help him. Over the next few days, news of Kashigi's death spread like wildfire and many hid their hateful glares until the rogues returned to their outpost. The only thing he could do to contain their rage was to propose a solution. It was one he had been weighing up in his mind for the last 9 months. He called for a village meeting inside the hall, forced to face the hundreds of people he had failed to protect. Yumi, Kashigi's wife, sat off to the side with her infant son, surrounded by concerned neighbors. She shot him a nervous smile and returned it, taking a breath before addressing the crowd before him. Thank you for gathering here today, everyone. He ran his eyes over the crowd of assembled adults. I'm sorry it feels like we are brushing past Kashigi's death. In some respect, we are. The jagged blades and their tyranny has stripped our village of all life. Their sadness hung in the air and he saw his helpless gaze reflected in the many of the villagers' eyes. Mr. Ohashi, Naomichi jumped to his feet. We can't take this anymore. Every time those bastards come here, they trample over us. They were bound to kill someone eventually and they will kill more. Yasuhiro looked down at the stage's hardwood floor. Naomichi had only given voice to the thoughts every one of them was thinking. He was forced to bend to Goro's whims. If he wanted food, he got it. If he wanted amusement, he got it. And as the village's leader, he was the one to break the terrible news to his people. He was the one they looked to for support that he couldn't offer. Because of his inability to offer it, Kashigi had taken things upon himself and died. You're right, Naomichi. Something must be done. We won't be able to take much more of their barbarity. What do we do then? The question had come from Chi, who was one of the people crowded around Yumi. The old woman's voice was blunt and her words were to the point. Because last I checked, none of us are shinobi. Yasuhiro smiled. You're right. However, if we pool our resources together, we can hire shinobi of our own. Intrigued whispers rose among the crowd. Don't worry, he added. I'll be contributing a sizable amount of my savings to take some of the demand off the rest of you. It's only right that I do so. If we're pooling resources, it better be someone good, said Chi. Yasuhiro tried for a confident smile, but seeing the doubt on everyone's faces at his words, it turned into a grimace. Of course, he couldn't blame them, but it still hurt to see. I'll do it. The whisper stopped. Yumi, his mouth hung open slightly in surprise. Are you sure? The widow nodded, a dark hatred rising to the surface of her tired face. They took my Kashigi away from me, away from his son. I believe in you, Mr. Ohashi. You're always standing between us and that horrible Guro. If my money will help, I'll gladly give it to you. Fuck it, Naomichi shot out of his chair. I'll give you my money too. I'm bloody tired of running around like a workhorse for that lot. One by one, the villagers stood up, pledging their support. Yasuhiro bowed deeply to them and they returned his bow, bringing tears to his eyes. Thank you, everyone, truly. I'll use your money to hire the strongest shinobi around. Yumi gasped. Wait, does that mean? Right, he nodded with a confident grin. Goro's days under the sun are numbered from here on out, so stay strong, everyone. I'm going to be hiring the Hidden Leaf. There was more to Kakashi's lateness than honoring the memory of his dead friend, just as there was more to his harshness as a teacher than arbitrary criteria. He wanted to teach his would-be students one thing, one lesson that every one of them failed spectacularly. They needed to learn to not rely on him, and for them to achieve that goal, it meant relying on each other. Out of the dozens of children he'd assessed, barely a handful seemed willing to do so. He saw shadows of the arrogant little shit he used to be in every new face. The one who believed wholeheartedly that comrades were of no value. Where did that land them? Relying on his mercy to pull his punches, unable to give their back to an ally. People like that weren't fit to be shinobi. Out in the field, they only had their allies and sometimes even they wouldn't be enough. And yet, after failing close to 40 children, Lord Third hadn't stopped throwing would-be genin at him, so here he was, at another genin draft meeting in the faint hopes he'd find some competent ones. He threw open the doors with a mighty sigh, disturbing the ongoing discussion and attracting half the room's ire, but Kakashi raised a hand at the only person who mattered. Yo. Kakashi, said Lord Third with a tired sigh. Elders Utatane and Homura scoffed to his right and Danzo, as always, merely frowned. You're 5 minutes earlier than last year, so I suppose I won't punish you. Much obliged, sir. Take a seat and I'll read out this year's roster from the top for your benefit. Lord Third simply smiled away half the room's grumbling. Hanoka Abe, Choji Akamichi, Tomio Araya. He leaned his head back, not bothering to write down any names because doing so was a waste of time. After the various Jonin had picked up to 6 students they wanted to teach, the cohort's homeroom teacher would pull up their recommended genin teams. More often than not, Lord Third tended to go with those recommended teams unless someone made a good case to the contrary, but Kakashi wasn't that person. He cracked his eyes open as one of the graduating year's teachers walked towards the center of the room, wheeling a standing board behind him. He flipped back a page, revealing the team compositions complete with photographs of each student. These are the proposed teams from my end, Lord Hokage. Thank you, Aruka. You may be seated. Lord Third cleared his throat. All right, let us begin. Tell me which students you want, and which ones you do not. Take into account the draft on the board, but you may also make an argument for a different team altogether if you wish, provided your reasoning is sound and no one else makes a stronger argument. Kakashi closed his eyes again, running down the minutes until it was his turn to go. The old man had given up trying to correct his behavior so long as he didn't cross the line into disrespect, which he wouldn't. His general lack of care for hierarchy aside, Lord Third was still the strongest shinobi in the village. As expected, most were angling for the top 10 and a few ambitious ones probably wanted the rookie of the year, not that their wants mattered. In the end, the most capable students would go to the most capable teachers. Kakashi glanced at Lord Third, who was listening to the first Jonin speech with faint interest. Knowing the old man, he'd most likely end up with the most troublesome of the lot. His yearly request to return to the Anbu had been denied upon the condition that one of his students make Jonin, and it just so happened that the 2 most troublesome students out of the lot were almost guaranteed to, if they survived. Jonin Kurenai Yuhi. Kakashi didn't recognize her from any of the previous draft meetings, so she was most likely a new promotion. Her last name seemed familiar to him, but he only realized why when she stood up to face him. Her father was Shinku Yugi, the shinobi who detained Kakashi and all the other young shinobi, preventing them from fighting against the Nine Tails. Lord Hokage, I don't want Naruto Uzumaki because I wouldn't have much to teach him. I also don't want Sasuke Uchiha because I believe there are others better equipped to teach him than myself. Kurenai Yugi looked over at him for a split second. With that in mind, I would like to request Shikamaru Nara, Ino Yamanaka, and Kiba Inuzuka as my genin. The disapproving whisper started almost immediately, but she didn't look perturbed in the slightest. Are you aware that the Ino Shikacho formation is a tried and tested team with the full backing of the 3 clans? I am. And you still wish to go ahead with your proposed team? The red-eyed woman stood up straight. I do. Why? Lord Third asked, his brown eyes alight with curiosity. Sir, while the Ino Shikacho formation is indeed formidable, I believe that Choji Akamichi is an outlier better suited for an assault team. And the other 2, why do you believe they should be on your team rather than continuing the successful model of the Ino Shikacho formation? She took a breath, her eyes looking about the room as if daring someone to challenge her. The team I'm proposing would be a hunter-killer team focused on assassinating or capturing targets of interest to extract vital information. Each of their abilities is perfect for a team like this and will draw out their maximum potential. Lord Third rubbed his chin pensively. You make a good point, Jonin Yuhi. So long as no one makes a better point by the end of the meeting, those 3 students will be yours. He looked to the elders on his right. Anything to add, my friends? Danzo gave a small shake of his head and it seemed he spoke for the other 2 elders because Lord Third asked the next shinobi to plead their case. Lord Hokage. Kakashi looked up to see an Akamichi Jonin leaning over the table. This is too far. Is it? Asked the old man with a small smile. He looked to the rest of the room. Are the rest of you in agreement with John and Akimichi? Around 2/3 of the room hummed in agreement. They were the old guard, people who'd fought in the wars and had seen the formation firsthand. The last third was all new hires who were either too afraid to go against the old guard. Kurenai Yuhi growled under her breath, looking ready to make another speech, but the bearded man beside her placed a calming hand on her shoulder. After a second look, Kakashi realized it was the third's wayward son, the very same one who'd practically abandoned the village for years. He remembered hearing that Asuma Sarutobi had returned to the village, but he didn't pay the news any mind at the time, as he'd never known him all that. Seeing him at a genin draft meeting was certainly a surprise. Well, isn't this a shame? Lord Third chuckled at the room's mood. It seems I'll be disappointing so many of my jonin. Would any of you care to challenge my opinion? Just a sliver of his killing intent was enough to exert noticeable pressure on a room of jonin, bringing an end to any debate over Kurenai Yuhi's choices. Kakashi felt himself sweat underneath his mask, adjusting it slightly to let the air cool off the uncomfortable heat. Lord Third was willing to let a lot of things go, but disrespect towards himself or his subordinates was not one of those things, especially if the disrespect was coming from one of their own. The next slew of arguments were all variations of the same pitch, so he tuned them out until he heard his name being mentioned. Kakashi looked up, realizing it was Asuma Sarutobi who was currently speaking. He stood tall despite the disdainful looks from the majority of the room. All these jonin refusing to take on Naruto Uzumaki is great for me because I'd like to have Choji Akimichi, Hinata Hyuga, and Naruto Uzumaki as my genin, said Asuma Sarutobi. Lord Third hummed, and if I were to say that young Naruto will go to Kakashi, what then? Kakashi sat up, leaning forward intently in anticipation. He hadn't seen this coming. Granted, he didn't know Asuma Sarutobi, but that only made his announcement even more of a surprise. You wouldn't be wrong from a certain point of view. The Sharingan is a surefire way to control a rampaging Jinchuriki because of its powerful ocular genjutsu. However, regular genjutsu, barrier ninjutsu, and even a plain old beating can do the same job. Where the Sharingan really shines is its ability to control tailed beasts. What? Asuma Sarutobi grinned, but I believe that so long as you're a decent amount stronger than the Jinchuriki before they lose their mind, you can clobber them before things get hairy. You're looking at this the wrong way, old man. Lord Third raised an eyebrow. How so? It's not only you, all of you are looking at this incorrectly. I get that Naruto Uzumaki's a generation talent in his Jinchuriki. He's supposed to be a literal deterrent against other nations. He folded his arms and jutted out his chin, but despite how important he is to this village, nobody seems to be worried at how skeptical he is of this place. And worse, he's completely right to be. The disdainful glares aimed at the man turned into scornful mutterings. A swift reprimand by Lord Third brought an end to it and he faced his son once again. Please, continue. I know you're already aware that I've been teaching the kid in my spare time for 2 years now. Otherwise you would have stopped it before the very first training session. Now, in those 2 years, I think I've gotten a better handle on who he is than anyone in this room. Asuma Sarutobi spoke his next words with damning confidence. Beyond the few friends he has and maybe myself, Naruto Uzumaki could not give a rat's ass about this village, the will of fire, and its people. Lord Third dragged a hand over his face. I'm aware, nor can I condemn him for it. And yet, said Danzo, speaking up for the first time in this meeting, what can be done about it? What can you do about it that John and Hataki cannot? Kakashi looked up at the mention of his name, slightly narrowing his eye in Danzo's direction. The man hadn't said a word this entire meeting, but when he finally spoke up, it was in support of Asuma Sarutobi, a jonin who wasn't thought well of these days. Asuma Sarutobi nodded gratefully at the man and Lord Third gave his friend a searching look before deflating with a heavy sigh, almost as if he was feeling the weight of every single year of his life. Honestly, the jonin said with a shrug, I don't know, but I know enough to try to help, having once been quite skeptical about it all myself. I might not be a Jinchuriki or possess the Sharingan, but I'm decently strong, and better than any of that, I think I can help Naruto Uzumaki believe in the will of fire again. Kakashi watched on, an odd panging in his chest. He tried to tell himself that he didn't want to teach Naruto. He didn't want to risk losing him, but watching the man plead so earnestly in the way that he should have, it was a bittersweet thing. I believe I know your answer, but I will ask you the same question that I asked John and Yuhi. Why break up the Ino-Shika-Cho trio? Seeing that she and I discussed this together, I'm glad you asked, old man. Asuma grinned and looked at the rest of the room. First, as far as I'm concerned, the rest of you can go and shove your paper-thin justifications up your... Asuma. The jonin coughed, looking away from Kurenai Yuhi's withering frown. Sorry. Lord Third snorted softly. You were saying? Right, Choji Akimichi, like Kurenai mentioned, we believe he'd do better on a heavy assault team. Why? Throughout the academy, he slowly built up his once non-existent confidence and abilities. I believe that not only would it prevent him from growing as a shinobi, it would also damage the confidence he's worked hard to build over the last few years because of the degree of reliance the formation requires. A fair point, said Lord Third. I believe you have an alternative? My fortress busting squad will center around Choji Akimichi as the main damage dealer. Hinata Hyuga will take advantage of her dojutsu to scout ahead and neutralize the enemy before I send off Choji Akimichi to, and excuse my language, essentially fuck shit up. And how does Naruto Uzumaki factor into this plan? Asked Lord Third. He'll be the mid to long range support, taking advantage of his large chakra reserves to bombard the enemy with ninjutsu. Once he learns to control the Nine Tails chakra, he can take some of the demand off them both. He eased into his chair as the sales pitches started. As predicted, almost every teacher waived the right to teach the Jinchuriki, mumbling about Kakashi's Sharingan and bringing a small frown to his face. They made their speeches, vying for dominance over a small percentage of students who had the highest scores. A few went for students with high potential but lower marks, but the majority were fixated on the top 10. Before Kakashi knew it, it was his turn to speak. Kakashi, said Lord Third, knowing your proclivities, I took the liberty of deciding on your team myself. Feel free to object to any particular children you don't want to teach, but how do Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Naruto Uzumaki sound? Right, I don't particularly care about who I teach, but I have something to say. Many gathered here believe, for one reason or the other, that I will be the Jinchuriki's teacher. Because of this assumption, they avoid his potential entirely. Well, it's either that or undeserved prejudice. He swept his eyes across the room, a good few heads looking down in embarrassment, or fear, he wasn't sure which. Whether I'll get Sasuke Uchiha is a foregone conclusion. That said, I would like to waive my right to teach Naruto Uzumaki. Kakashi looked away from Lord Third's disappointed eyes. And why do you not wish to teach him? Truth be told, he wanted nothing more than to teach his sensei's son, to make up for the years he'd spent shirking the responsibility of raising him. Yet when the opportunity presented itself, Kakashi couldn't do it. Worse, he was afraid to do it, worried that he would once again lead his loved ones to death. As he stared at the familiar blonde hair and blue eyes plastered on the board beside him, Minato-sensei's strangely enduring trust forced itself to the front of his mind. Misplaced trust that led to his and Kushina's death. Misplaced trust that led to Obito's death and then to Rin's. So, who was he to believe his sensei wanting him to train his son wasn't just another tragedy waiting to happen? Repeated experience had proven to him that when it came down to it and Kakashi was the only thing standing between his loved ones and certain death, he failed them every single time. Minato-sensei put him in charge of Obito and Rin, and Obito died, asking him to protect Rin with his dying breath. Not long after that, he failed so badly that she felt the need to impale herself on his jutsu rather than trust in his abilities to protect her himself. So, if denying his sensei's wishes meant his son got to live, then Kakashi would gladly forego teaching the boy, even if he so desperately wanted to. John and Sarutobi made a pretty convincing case, and it's clear he cares enough about the genin he proposed to be a good teacher. He looked up and shrugged, and if I'm going to be saddled with a team, it might as well be to my capabilities. I'm keeping my eye out for genin who would fit on a team primarily based on sabotage. For obvious reasons, Jinchuriki aren't exactly on the top of that list. I see. Lord Third took a moment to collect himself, and when he opened his eyes, none of the previous tiredness showed on his face. Kakashi, your team will now be Sasuke Uchiha, Sakura Haruno, and Shino Aburame. That would satisfy your request for a saboteur team? Kakashi nodded, once again avoiding eye contact with the man. And you're sure you don't wish to teach Naruto Uzumaki? I'm sure. Lord Third's disappointed gaze lingered a few moments longer before he sorted the rest of the genin. With the top 10 students spread amongst himself, Asuma Sarutobi, and Kurenai Yuhi, the meeting came to a swift conclusion. Everyone else was forced to settle with students with lower marks, or overall lower potential, grumbling about their rotten luck. Kakashi scoffed at their excuses. In the end, the most promising students went to the most capable teachers. He exited the stairs at the bottom of the Hokage building, keeping his head low. If he was quick enough, he'd be able to vanish before he found him. Kakashi. A booming voice cut the reception's orderly silence. Everyone carried on as normal, all too familiar with the owner's antics to care. Kakashi sighed. Hello, guy.